Hey everyone, Screenplay Archaeology host KiramidHead here. Just wanted to get some plugs out of the way before the new episode starts. We have now come under the umbrella of Fandom Lib Media, which is also the home of the Table Reads podcast, which is a fellow unproduced script podcast, where they read said scripts out in full over several episodes. So if you like this subject matter and you're curious about a different format for it, definitely check those guys out. Not the least reason which is because you'll be paying tribute to my new podcast overlords, and that can only have a benefit. Also, check out the Shelved Film podcast, which covers similar subject matters. They're not tied in with us, but I want you to go check them out. I want to make that recommendation because I'm just a nice guy like that. And as usual, be sure to check us out on social media on Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter. We're on almost every means of listening to podcasts. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, a bunch of other places, especially now that I'm on a new platform which can distribute it to a whole ton of different places. So be sure to check out Spotify, Google Podcasts, stuff like that as well. And also a couple of things I want to throw out at the end. We do have a Patreon page. There's not much there. I can't really think of a rewards tier at the moment. And also, I have a Discord server that's been put together for a while, so if you want to show up and try that, as long as you're not an asshole, nothing will happen to you. You won't get kicked out. Just follow the rules. You'll be good. Check that link out down below. And with that, enjoy the episode. Alright everyone, hello and welcome to a new episode of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host KiramidHead, and today I am bringing you a new solo episode. And this time we're going to be focusing on a fairly well-known superhero character. He is the Scarlet Speedster, the DC character known as The Flash, the fastest man alive, and we'll be covering 4 scripts in this episode, because this is one character whose development has taken forever to get into a film, and in fact is still ongoing at this point. And I'll jump in, and I guess I'll start off by talking about just a little teeny tiny bit of background, because there's only a little bit I can fill in here. The Flash is a character I like quite a bit. I remembered earlier on seeing him show up in like the Justice League cartoon and stuff like that. And as far as the other stuff goes, I've read the Jeff Johns run with Wally West as the Flash, which is fantastic, aside from a couple of, let's just say, they're very Jeff Johns-y things he kind of pulls in there, like some cosmic retconning he throws in there for no fucking reason whatsoever. But other than that, that was a really solid run, some really great stories, did some cool stuff with the villains in that. I've read the first trade of the New 52 series, and I wasn't so hot on it at the time, but maybe that's one I'll go back to and read some of it and see what I think now, because I still have that trade despite, not having read it in like 6 years now or something like that. And I was at first, I should say that I've never actually seen the 1990s Flash series. They got, 2 seasons? I've never seen that. I should really check that out eventually. I was at first a big fan of the CW series, and the first season was really, really good. The whole storyline they did with the Reverse Flash and the mystery behind him and what's going on there was really fun to watch unfold, and the standalone kind of villain of the week episodes were pretty fun too. And then season 2 rolled around and it was like, well, we're just doing the same shit again. It's a different mystery evil speedster and we're just repeating shit. And right around that time was when Arrow started slipping into its shittiest of the shitty periods, where it was just like, oh god, what the hell is going on here? And so I just kind of quit watching both those shows and most TV at that time, and so that's where I left it. Maybe I'll go back and watch more Flash, but I don't know yet at the moment what I'm going to be doing. So yeah, with that background out of the way, we can get into the scripts. Now, interestingly enough, development on a Flash movie started as early as the late 1980s, because the first script I have here is written by Jim Strain, who was a co-writer on Jumanji, and it's credited as having from a story by Todd Holland. And I'm thinking, is this the same Todd Holland who had gone to direct The Wizard with Fred Savage? And I think it is, because there's a couple scenes here and there where I'm like, this is totally the guy who did The Wizard contributed to this story, and I guess he was in line to direct it. And it's a second draft dated September 16th, 1987. Now, background for this particular draft, I haven't found a whole lot of information on. Like, it's not something you really see talked about a lot. In fact, the background that you do see about the 1980s development of a Flash movie generally relates to something that would have happened a bit later after this version was written. So this script, the basic story is that, we've got Barry Allen, who is a, forensic scientist at the police crime lab, like he is in the comics. And this time he lives in Mile High City instead of Central City, so it's more of a mountainous community. I guess it's meant to be kind of equivalent to Denver in this script. And there's a meteor shower comes down, and there's an alien ship that's hiding amongst the meteor showers coming down to Earth. It collides with a plane, and a few of these spheres that are surrounding it, they break off and they scatter around, the local area, and Barry Allen ends up getting one, and he's studying it, and he tries to drill into it, and this red energy comes out of it, and it merges with him, and that makes him the super fast Flash. And meanwhile, there's one of the aliens from inside the ship who draws his energy from several of the spheres that were surrounding it, and brings himself to life, essentially, is trying to do the same for his mate, but because those 3 spheres are missing, he has to go track those down and get the energy back, and so the alien is essentially the bad guy. Now, the script starts off with, and it actually weirdly takes like 10 pages before we even get introduced to Barry Allen, which I think is kind of strange, because it opens on the mountain-adjacent community of Mile High City, where a meteor shower is due to pass overhead, and apparently this is such a big deal that people are hosting parties in their houses over this. I'm like, okay, really? Is this like all the old hippies gathered in Mile High City, like, dude, meteor shower, totally cool. So those are passing overhead, and hidden among the meteors is a spherical alien vessel, and it has like several spheres that are like circling around it and like embedded in a circle. It's not really clear to me how many there are total, but we'll get to that in a bit. But it collides with an airplane, and 3 of the spheres break away from the vessel. One crashes into a building in the inner city, where a character who is only referred to as a homeboy goes to investigate. Another lodges inside the plane, which leaks yellow energy, and it lets off this tone that deafens the crew, and the plane crashes into a cliff. Now, the spheres in general will, whenever you're like interacting with them or the alien is doing anything, they will let off like this weird tonal thing. Like they'll make like a noise, and it makes like this weird almost kind of like music, and it will fuck with anything like adjacent to the spheres when this happens. And because Barry has, ingested the energy from one of the spheres, like it'll start screwing with him too. So that's like an interesting kind of audio visual thing the script does. And then the third crashes into a suburban house that begins to leak red fluid before the holes in it close up, and it leaves like a residue on it. And there's like this old couple named Mom and Pop who live in this house, and they both get killed by the house collapsing on them. So that's a good indication as to what this script's sense of humor is like. And then the vessel itself, it lands in the woods, and 2 chrome, featureless aliens emerge from it, and one feeds off several of the spheres coming to life, but the other is unable to complete the process thanks to the 2 missing spheres. And so it kind of looks like, the way it's described, it kind of looks like the T-1000 when it does like the Chrome Man thing, and it gets a little bit more like T-1000 in a second. And so the living alien shrieks with anger when it sees that its mate can't fully come to life. And when the park ranger named Rothnaris, who I swear is like the park ranger version of Buford T. Justice, like the way he talks about punks and stuff, it's kind of ridiculous. He comes to investigate the landing site because he saw smoke rising from the trees and thought it was an illegal campfire. So apparently he's also, Smokey the Bear. And it attacks him, and it grabs him by the throat and starts taking on his appearance. So it's also a bit like the T-1000 in that way. And it's now that we get introduced to forensic scientist Barry Allen, who is playing poker with several of his cop buddies, and he's winning pretty well. And these guys all have names, but none of them are really terribly important. Like, they're kind of fun characters to have around. Like, they're all kind of given like a lot of real fun banter with each other where they give each other shit, but a lot of it isn't terribly important or memorable, at least not as individual characters. And so, they're talking, they're giving off some friendly banter, giving each other shit, and they mention that there's this new hot woman named Laura Ellis who works at the lab, and apparently Barry is so intent on his studies and his work that he hasn't even noticed her yet. And his beeper goes off, which forces him to leave. And he goes to investigate the house where the red sphere crashed, and Laura's there working, getting her field training, and she moves some fragments of wood, and Barry gives her shit about not doing things by the book, because he's very much a straight arrow, by the book kind of guy. Yeah, and so she initially doesn't seem to like him very much, and then he's shown the sphere, and he gives it a cursory examination before ordering it taken back to the crime lab. And so we go back to the vessel, and the alien has completely imitated Rothnaris and taken his clothes, dumping the body in the nearby river. It then takes traces of the 3 missing spheres from the main vessel and leaves to track the missing items down. Yeah, there's like little pieces of crystals are embedded in the vessel where the spheres were embedded, and it uses these to track it down. And so we then get there's a lot of intercut sequences in this where you'll have the alien doing stuff and then Barry doing stuff and maybe other characters doing stuff. And eventually, as I'm taking my notes, I just started separating those out and writing them down as separate things instead of trying to, keep track of all the cutting back and forth. So eventually I do just stop doing that, but I just wanted to let you know that is how the script is structured. So 2 sequences are intercut. Barry buys Laura coffee at the lab, awkwardly trying to make nice with her, and he's also being brutally honest about the frustrations that come with the job. And then we see Rothnaris, the Rothnaris alien tracking down the first sphere, which crashed with the plane. And it sucks the yellow energy out of the pilot that the pilot unwittingly absorbed, and then brings it back to the vessel where it gives the energy to its mate. And it's very clear that the alien sucking the energy out is killing these people. So we go back to the inner city where 2 gangs are fighting over who gets to spray paint the sphere with their gang tags, and the sphere ends up rolling down the stairs into the basement, and there's a guy named Spider who has a scar shaped like a spider web under his eye, intimidates the other gang members and goes down the stairs to claim it for himself. So that's where that sphere is going, and we then see Barry performing a battery of sophisticated tests on the sphere, but they all seem to uncover nothing, and he takes an x-ray of it, which will be important in a minute. Well, a little bit more than a minute. But we then see that the Rothnaris alien is tracking the sphere that crashed in the city, and he's looking at it from a distance, like it's pretty far away, and this is also where we find out that he can't step into the light, I think, because he steps out of the shade of the trees, and the sun starts screwing with him, and it starts melting his disguise. I'm not entirely clear if it's just affecting the disguise, or if it's affecting the alien itself as well. That's one thing that could be a little bit clearer. And after finally giving up on the advanced scientific tests, Barry takes the sphere to the machine shop and tries to saw it open, which that doesn't work, and then before settling on using a diamond-tipped drill bit, when this causes an explosion, which knocks Barry back and traps him under debris, and there's a bit where, the energy causes a power saw to miraculously come to life, and it almost gets Barry, but then a red aura emerges from the damaged sphere, and absorbs into Barry, who unwittingly survives a falling chunk of debris by phasing his body and letting it go through. And eventually, Laura finds him unconscious on the floor, only no longer trapped. So yeah, we're getting a little bit of an intro to Barry Allen's powers, this origin story, completely different and kind of off the point of what the original comics is with the lightning strike and all that. But, I mean, it's okay in the context of this as a standalone piece, but they are very close to his powers as well, like the ability to vibrate and let stuff go through him unharmed. That's actually a very comic-like power of his. Also, I should be quick to point out that when this was written, Mark Waid had not written his seminal Flash run yet, so a lot of the exposition of how the powers work and the Speed Force and all that stuff hadn't been introduced yet into the character. So literally it's just he got struck by lightning all covered with chemicals, and now he's really, really fast. That was my understanding is that was pretty much what was in place at that point. Or if you're the Jay Garrick Flash, you took a smoke in the lab and fucked yourself up. But, that's, neither here nor there. And so Barry, he falls asleep in the ambulance on his way to the hospital, and while this is going on, the Rothnaris alien, unable to stand the sunlight for long and keep up its disguise, sits in the shade as its attention is drawn to a cafe by the sound of a barking dog. It scans the building, which we see from its point of view, and Barry awakes at the hospital, apparently having, shared the alien's perspective in his dreams. And the Rothnaris alien then approaches the cafe only to get clipped by a truck, and then the driver takes him inside, and the alien learns to crudely speak by examining a newspaper, and then after, the alien says, "Oh, I'm okay," the truck driver leaves. And so at the hospital, Barry's boss Hoffman, who never actually comes back, which is interesting considering, some of the third act stuff here, he berates him for destroying the machine shop, but lets him take 2 days off to recuperate. And Laura, who's feeling kind of bad about the situation, offers to let Barry stay at her brother's mountain cabin, and he accepts. And also, during this whole conversation, Barry is voraciously eating hospital food, which normally you would not eat voraciously at all, but this is tying into other Flash comic powers where he has to keep eating, or else because him being fast means his metabolism is also faster, so he has to eat at a prodigious rate. And so we go back to the cafe, and the Rothnaris alien checks the sunrise and sunset times in the newspaper, and he steals a wide-brimmed hat and a pair of sunglasses as it leaves. I should call it an it, because it's not really a he, as we will find out in detail later. There's also a fisherman telling his friend about hooking a dead body, and we infer that it was, the real Rothnaris that he found. There's also a cutaway during the sequence to trees being felled near the vessel and the alien's partially formed mate. Laura drives Barry to the cabin, which is situated near a small town named Tabor, with Barry rolling down the window despite the cold weather. When they arrive, Barry meets the dog, and this dog Daryl is weird because I'm guessing it's her brother's dog, but just hangs around in the area and mooches off the neighbors, so it's like a neighborhood dog. I don't think, the ASPCA would be down with that, but whatever. It takes a shine to him and it steals his crutch, and there's a moment where he tries to walk but slips and Laura catches him, and so it's a bit of a love story build up here, and I will say the relationship here is actually reasonably decent. I mean, it's not like the greatest love story ever written, but the script doesn't try and play it up as such, so it works fine as these two just sort of falling into a bit of a relationship as they go. I mean, it works okay for what they're doing here. And she leaves him there to go back to the city, and we then see that the Rothnaris alien has resumed its journey into the city in search of the orange sphere, and it's just walking its way down the road, because it hasn't figured out cars yet. At the cabin, Barry finds that his broken leg has been healing surprisingly quickly, and calls the hospital to ask about his x-rays, because his leg broke during the accident, and that's a thing that happened. And only to be told that they had blurred somehow, and gets the guy on the other end to send them to him because he apparently owes somebody at the crime lab a favor, and Barry's cashing it in. And during this conversation, Barry sneezes and his head vibrates, but only Daryl notices. And Barry, he gets hungry and he doesn't like what's in the fridge, so he heads into town to buy groceries, stocking up on all this high sugar content food. And he fixes a display he accidentally knocks over super quickly and drums his fingers really fast while waiting in line, but he doesn't realize what he's doing yet. And finally, he passes out in the parking lot before eating anything. Okay, we then go back to the crime lab where Laura arrives and tries to get prints off a corpse that Kovitz, one of the co-workers, is sketching. And it turns out that it's the body of Rothnaris with bags on his hands to preserve any potential evidence under his nails. And so he's like, you gotta wait in line for the fingerprints. We got, not till I'm done with them, which is pretty funny. And so we go back to the Rothnaris alien who's made it to the city. And it enters a circuit city, making the electronics go on the fritz, and so it's scanning them, grabbing pieces, because it's basically gathering up electronics to make like a gadget. And then a thief grabs his duffel bag, and it lets out an unearthly shriek and pursues the thief, not even being fazed when it gets hit by a car. And it chases the thief into an alley and yanks him down from a fire escape even after he drops the bag, because the guy is freaking out, drops the bag, goes to escape up a fire escape, and then the alien just grabs the fire escape and he yanks it off the building to screw with the guy. And I'm like, wow, you are really pissed off about this, aren't you? And so the Rothnaris alien then sells inside an abandoned building and constructs a focuser for the orange crystal, which cuts through the interference found in the city. And I'm like, I don't really feel like they explained the whole interference thing very well before this point. Maybe I just missed that detail. I'm not sure, but it's a little difficult to say. But it basically makes it like an eye patch that puts over its eye and uses it to filter out the interference and be easier time finding the sphere. And so it tracks the sphere to Spider's drug den where it sits like a trophy, and the alien fights and kills all of the men before reclaiming the sphere, which would be that's one thing in the script that's actually pretty cool, is that when the alien is taking on loads of guys at once, the action scenes are pretty cool. And meanwhile, Barry gets woken up by the sheriff, and after seeing that Daryl has eaten all of his groceries, heads to an all-night cafe. And while eating, he discovers his vibrations, and he freaks out, vibrating through the glass window and setting his clothes on fire. They eventually burn off, and he runs as fast as he can, even outrunning the sheriff's police car, who is making out with his girlfriend in the car instead of, paying attention to his job, which is kind of funny. And he basically runs into a cornfield, and the car crashes into the corn, and then he eventually collapses and falls asleep near a beaver pond. And Barry then awakes the next morning and manages to concentrate and get the vibrating under control before stealing clothes off a clothesline. And there's a woman watching him and she's like perving on his nakedness, which is kind of funny. And he goes into town to get more candy bars. Meanwhile, the Rothaeris alien is whiling the daylight hours away beneath an underpass. And he's watching this guy sitting down in the lawn chair to hitchhike, and so he's learning how to hitchhike. And then Laura gets the results back on the corpse, including its identity and the fact that the prints on its neck wound match his own, which they're like, what's going on here? Also, the loggers find the alien vessel and they take it out of the woods with a crane. And this is where Barry, he gets his leg x-ray in the mail and he compares it to the x-ray he took of the red sphere, and he notes that the fogging is identical on both. He puts together that the energy from the sphere has now entered him and catches a fly out of the air. And wanting to see how fast he can go, Barry buys the white lining for a fire suit from a local survivalist store, and he goes out for a run where he breaks the sound barrier. And like actually asks, like, apparently they didn't have any fire suits, but they had but they only had the white lining, so he's putting his costume together pretty slowly. We go back to the Rothaeris alien, where it mimics a hitchhiker and gets picked up by a woman named Rita in a Volkswagen, and it has her drive him into the woods and observing how she works the pedals. And thinking that he's checking her out, Rita goes in this scene, dear lord, she goes to feel up his leg and it moves his hand to his crotch, and then she notices that, he doesn't have a dick, and she freaks out and runs out of the car, and then the alien just steals it and drives away. Yeah, that's the part that makes me think this was definitely the story credit guy. It's definitely the same Todd Howland who did The Wizard, because this just feels like the dickless alien equivalent of the "he touched my breast" scene. Sorry, I couldn't help myself with that one. And it eventually makes its way back to the landing site, screeching in rage when it sees that the vessel is gone. So it's like, oh shit, my woman's gone. And meanwhile, Barry gets a call patched through to Laura, who is investigating the rock house where the alien left Rothaeris' uniform, as well as the now empty orange sphere. And I'm like, rock house? Do they mean crack house when they say that? Because otherwise, rock house, I don't know what they mean. And he asks her to meet him at the cabin at 8, wanting to show her his new powers, and then Barry goes to sleep, and he wakes up at 7:44 p.m., and he goes through like his waking up routine really quickly in about a minute, and he also cleans up all the empty food boxes and packages they left scattered there after binging, which he cleans up as well. And as she's driving up to the cabin, he quickly runs out to get some flowers, and then she's waiting there 15 minutes because he has to walk back because he doesn't want the flowers to set on fire. And he's wearing the outfit, which is now pink because he was washing it with a pair of red underwear. So that's why the Flash's costume is red, because he accidentally turned it pink in the washer. Kind of stupid, but kind of funny at the same time. And also while he's at the florist, he sees this stencil of Mercury or Hermes on the window, and he starts thinking, as to how he could design the costume. I guess he's thinking of a way to get around that. And she just gets annoyed with it, and he's talking about dyeing it red and giving it gold lightning trim, and she goes, how about put a thunderbolt on? He's like, good idea. And so she gets annoyed and drives away, and he's like running and keeping up with the car, talking to him, and she notices that he's running at 40 miles per hour, and so that gets her to stop and listen. And we then go to a salvage yard where the vessel and the mate have been taken, and an artist named Arlo is about to use the ladder to make a sculpture, so this guy is basically Dean from the Iron Giant. It's art! When the Rothaeris alien shows up and fights him, getting an acetylene torch to the face, revealing, part of the alien face, before impaling Arlo to death on one of its own sculptures. And it then grabs the mate, strapping it to the roof of the stolen car. It's described as being like a surfboard, and he steals an umbrella as well, which I guess is... I don't think the umbrella ever gets mentioned again, but I guess he uses that to kind of get around in sunlight a little bit better. I'm not 100% positive, but I don't remember the umbrella getting specifically mentioned again. And so Barry and a frustrated, impatient Laura have dinner, and she's impatient because he's not actually, telling her anything, he's just eating. And he actually nods off at the table, and she sees him start vibrating, and then he vibrates through the wall and back, and then he starts like, okay, it's harmless, I can touch you, see, and he starts giving her a massage, and she's kind of liking it, and he starts going, just leave it to the invincible vibrating man, or something like that. She goes like, nope, stop, which is kind of funny. Kind of a goofy joke, though. But she freaks out, and he finally explains what happened, and then when he mentions the sphere, Laura tells him about the other one they found in the city, and they immediately go to drive off in her Jeep because he wants to take a look at it, even though she says it must be empty because it weighed a lot less than the one Barry was examining. And meanwhile, the alien has moved its mate to a mountain cave where it imbues it with the orange energy from the second sphere, and when this is happening, this causes Barry to start having those nightmares again while riding in the car with Laura. And they stop at an all-night market so Barry can pick up some food, where he ends up using his super speed to foil an attempted robbery, and he asks the owner if they have fabric dye. And they continue towards the city, and Laura gives him crap about not having his costume ready for the robbery, and he's like, okay, next time I will. So his first, superhero moment, he's not in costume. Then we go back to the cave, and the Rothaeris alien takes the red crystal and puts it in its focuser thing and begins tracking down Barry with it. So we're moving into the end game here. And that's one thing I have with this script, is that it's a little bit repetitive, and it doesn't really, you can map out where this thing is going almost immediately, because it's basically Barry figuring shit out, and the alien goes and tracks down the spheres, and it finds the first one, no problems, finds the second one, takes a while to do it, but finds it with relatively few problems, and then now it's coming after Barry, so it's going to try and come get him, and obviously it's going to fail because it's the Flash, and we can't kill him here. So Laura and Barry, they arrive at the crime lab, and they start examining the second sphere and running all sorts of tests, with Barry identifying Rothaeris' fingerprints on it, with Laura saying he was already dead before the sphere was found. And they piece together the real story, and that aliens must somehow be involved, and that, the Rothaeris who's walking around must be an alien, and stuff like that. They figure things out pretty quickly. And we have Barry doing things super quickly in this sequence, he checks the records for the fingerprints, and he assembles this laser thing that he wants to examine the sphere with. And he has to do it super quickly because, the lab's about to open up and all the other technicians are going to come into work. And there was this thread they set up earlier where his co-workers are very fond of the practical jokes to cut down on the boredom. And he's looking through, Heatherly, who's one of his colleagues, he's looking through his drawer full of joke items. And when Heatherly comes into work, he's like, hey, my joke ring that opens up, it's gone. Which one of you took it? And so you get the idea that Barry took it. And as the other lab techs begin arriving in the building, the Rothaeris alien does as well, with Kovitz recognizing him as the corpse from earlier. And a big fight breaks out, with the techs actually doing pretty well, including one guy shooting him with a fire extinguisher, but of course Rothaeris is dominating the fight. And then it finds Barry, who starts getting woozy from the tones that the alien is giving off, so that's that tone thing again. And a few cops arrive shooting at the alien, but the bullets pass through it, and one hits Barry in the shoulder, which breaks him out of his trance, and Laura helps him escape the building. And there's a bit with the alien learning how to use an elevator, which is kind of whatever. It kind of undercuts the villain's villainy. And so a car chase ensues, with Laura driving Barry in her Jeep while the alien pursues in the stolen VW. It gets quite intense. There's a bit where they drive against traffic, and then they eventually go into a tunnel. And during the chase, Barry tells Laura that, from his nightmares, he's learned that, that the alien is trying to restore its mate, and they came here to breed. And that's all you really learn about this. You don't find out if they're here to invade or whatever. You just find out they came to Earth to breed. So it's kind of like Barry is stopping these people from having their family. They don't define what the alien is up to well enough, so it's just kind of like, wow, Barry, you're just going to render this species extinct, aren't you? This is yeah, our hero, ladies and gentlemen. And so they drive into a tunnel during the chase, and the alien reaches out and almost touches Barry, but it's forced to retreat when the sunlight hits it. So Barry and Laura, they make it to the hospital, where he slowly recovers from the bullet wound, but faster than most people would. And he tells her that he now knows that a single touch will transfer the energy to the alien. And he also reveals that the costume is now hidden inside the ring, and shows Laura and the audience his fully realized costume for the first time, which is red, has the lightning trim, the lightning bolt insignia, and it also has wings of Mercury on it, which is interesting because that's more Jay Garrick Flash's thing than Barry Allen Flash. So we're kind of mixing concepts of the two costumes. He has he has the face cover instead of the helmet, but he also has the wings on it. So we're mixing the costumes. And that's when the Rothaeris alien arrives at the hospital, taking advantage of the overcast weather to move about freely. And Barry senses this, and he flees with Laura, helping to unlock a door by vibrating his hand through it. And he quickly re-energizes with candy bars from a vending machine, so he's back to 100%. And meanwhile, the alien is fighting the hospital security guards and learns how to use a gun as it goes, but then once again, the threat is undermined by it firing the gun, but it's empty. And so there's a chase, there's a foot chase between the alien and the two of them, and Barry and Laura, they're heading for the heliport so Laura can escape in a helicopter, and Barry tries to buy her time to get away by setting off the fire alarms and closing fire doors, but the alien actually manages to hold it open and get through, because it's super strong. and he heads to the roof, but no, and he eventually lures the alien into an oxygen storage room with the tanks open and hissing, and Barry sets off an explosion by vibrating his hand in an oxygen stream, and he heads to the roof and covers Laura, but unfortunately the stunt with the explosion makes the helicopter crash and kills the pilot, and then the alien arrives stripped of its disguise by the fire, so that's yet another kind of Terminator-y kind of thing here, and Barry fights the alien, and deduces that the alien is all energy, which shoots some electricity at him. And so he's like throwing like metal rods at the alien and like poking him through, and there's one moment where he actually pulls one out, and I'm like, did James Cameron read this before he made Terminator 2? Because that's kind of similar to a moment from that movie. And then eventually there's some back and forth here where, like, Barry's trying to get the alien. Barry is trying to get the alien to walk to these live power cables so that, like, the rods will touch them and it will kill the alien. But it takes a little while to do that. Like, it tries to hold Laura hostage at one point, but she screws around with its eye patch thing and gets away. Then eventually, like, it was walking towards Barry and it's standing over him. And the rods are not quite touching it, but then Laura makes a noise and it turns to look at her, and that moves the rods into the power cable, and then it overloads the alien and it dies, and Barry and Laura, they kiss to celebrate the victory. And it pretty much ends there, except for one scene where it cuts to the cave, and the alien's partially animated mate is still there. I mean, it's kind of vibrating a bit, so it's still semi-alive, but not really, so we get a bit of a sequel hook with more aliens, and it ends. So yeah, this script, not a horrible script, really, but the whole alien thing just kind of feels like we're doing our own original idea, blah, blah, blah. But taken on its own terms, it's an okay, decent script. The villain could be punched up a little bit so he's not constantly doing these. There's a lot of fish out of water stuff with him that is not as funny as the script makes it sound. And I kind of just skipped over a bunch of that when I'm describing the script because it's really not that big of a deal. But I don't know, the villain could be a bit better, and we could maybe give Barry a little bit more to do in the plot instead of finding out everything 20 pages before the end like he does here. Because this is a fairly short script, it's 112 pages, and you could have gone like 5-10 more pages and just, given Barry Allen as a character a little bit more to do, maybe threw in some more interactions with his co-workers and stuff like that, and like interwove the two plot lines a little bit better. But overall, it's not a terrible script, it's just not particularly what I'd want to see from a Flash movie. And like I said, I wasn't able to find any real background on this thing doing the research. The most I was able to find is that at one point in the 80s, and it would have been later because this was described as being in around 1989, is that Jeff Loeb was brought in because he wasn't a comic book writer yet at that point. He was still very much a movie writer because he had done Teen Wolf and Commando, and he had built kind of a career around that, and he was brought in apparently by John Peters to work on a Flash movie in the wake of the success of 1989, but that never materialized. And I'm guessing the reason why it never materialized is because there was never a budget for it, or it would have been too expensive. And I don't know if he was supposed to rewrite this script or write it from scratch, but apparently it never went anywhere. And it's really difficult to get the details on that, because the only place I've ever seen him talk about it is in an episode of Fat Man on Batman with Kevin Smith, and it's like 2 parts long, and they're supposed to be talking about the long Halloween, but they talk about every other fucking thing while they're at it. And he's in the middle of talking about possibly writing for The Flash, and they just keep getting distracted and talking about a bunch of bullshit. So it's like, oh god. It's impossible to kind of draw any information from that. But so that version just sort of never went anywhere in the late 80s, and it went on hold. The idea of a Flash movie was on hold for quite a while until the mid 2000s. And development on the Flash movie didn't finally pick up again until 2004, when David S. Goyer, who had written the Blade movies and he had directed Blade Trinity, unfortunately, and he had just turned in the first draft of Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, which he worked on, and then Nolan went to work on the script after he left because he had to go make Blade Trinity. But he got invited into Warner Brothers, who were impressed enough with his Batman Begins script to want to offer him more superhero stuff, and they offered him the choice of doing either The Flash or Green Lantern, and he jumped at the chance to do The Flash. Now, he signed on to write and direct, which is kind of a mixed bag because Goyer has been a good writer often enough. The first 2 Blade movies I think are quite good, Batman Begins, and he had story credits on the other 2 Nolan Batman movies. So he's written stuff that's good, and he helped write Terminator Dark Fate, which I actually didn't mind, which I know that's going to kill my credibility with some people, but I like that. But directing-wise, I mean, I've only seen Blade Trinity, but that movie was fucking ass, to say the least. I've not heard anything good about the other movies he's directed. I've not heard anything good about The Invisible, or what the fuck was it called? Was it The Unborn, the Jewish exorcism movie, which I've heard is also really bad. So yeah, this seems like one of those things where it's kind of like, I don't know. But he turns in the script, and the draft is, apparently he turned in an earlier draft sometime in 2005, but the draft is dated October 3rd, 2006. And the basic plot of this is that it's mainly following Wally West, but it starts when he's a kid. His Uncle Barry Allen is the original Flash, and he gets caught and killed, apparently, by this criminal figure known as Victor Vesp, who's trying to steal his speed. And Wally West gets hit with this blast of lightning. And then 12 years later, he's 26, and he gets struck by lightning again, and that wakes up the powers that got transferred to him in that moment. And so he kind of takes on the powers and the persona of the Flash, and Vesp returns to try his experiment again, and he brings another villain to the table, which I won't give away quite yet. And so it's sort of a coming-of-age story for Wally West, kind of trying to find his place in the world and to accept the legacy that he has been stuck with by Barry and, circumstances. Now, to jump into the actual script itself, I'm going to start with my notes now. It opens with a shot of the camera. It's like a POV shot moving through a landscape, continuously getting faster, and the image starts to blur. And there's an adult Wally West narrating about how lightning never strikes twice, but in his case it did. And he says it happened, the first time he says, happened on the night his Uncle Barry died and the whole world found out he was the Flash. And before then, the Flash was just an urban legend, he explains. And so that jumps back in time. There's like text on the screen saying 12 years ago. And it takes us to Keystone City, where the 14-year-old Wally is firing a slingshot off at houses under construction. He is pursued and caught by cops Kyer and Murillo, who are characters from the comics. They generally only appear in like adult Wally West stories. Like they're like, I don't know if they're in the Barry stuff because I've not read a whole lot of it, but they are both in the later Wally stuff, although Murillo actually shows up in Keystone City in that, so they're kind of, playing with the timeline a bit here. But they pursue him, and he gets brought to his Uncle Barry and Aunt Iris's house. And Barry and Wally, they take a walk together, and they talk about the situation while they're sitting on a bluff overlooking the city. And we learn here that Wally has been spending the summer with his aunt and uncle while his parents are getting divorced, and that he doesn't want to go home. And his father apparently just up and left, unable to handle the responsibility of parenthood. And here we learn that Barry and Iris, they can't have kids, and so Barry is like, taking, the opportunity to be with Wally as much as he can. And we get the idea that he's more of a real father figure to Wally than his real father is. And so Barry gets called in to work and tells Wally that he can't come with this time, unfortunately. And so Barry tells Iris that his colleague Hunter has called him in to participate in the SWAT raid on the home of a criminal named Victor Vesp. And we get the idea that she knows he's the Flash here, and it's a nice scene between the couple before he leaves, and she's saying, don't say you'll be back by dinner or I'll kill you, which is, it's a very nice little interaction between the characters here. Also, they can't have kids. Sorry, Bart Allen, you don't exist in this universe. A little inside joke for Flash fans there. And Iris goes to look for Wally, but he's gone, having hidden in the back of Barry's SUV. And so Barry pulls up outside a fancy chateau where he talks to his colleague and friend Hunter Zolomon, who tracked Vesp, a wanted international art thief, to this place, which is patterned after Bernini's architectural designs, which were also stolen by Vesp. And Barry thinks, it may have been too easy, but Hunter simply tells him to do his thing. And all through this, they're being watched by Wally, who is hidden in the nearby trees, who in turn gets spotted by a hidden security camera. And he gets carried off at gunpoint by a thug named Edmund Slow, who tells him he'll kill him if he cries out. Barry goes into the woods and changes into his costume, which is hidden inside his ring, and goes on a super fast reconnaissance of the chateau. And he's running through all the different rooms looking around. And he's communicating with Hunter via an earpiece built into the lightning bolt on the side of his head, and he tells him that no one appears to be home. But we see that he's being observed by a shadowy figure via hidden cameras who is watching the police outside the house as well. And just as the SWAT team begins to burst into the chateau, Barry finds a hidden high-tech sub-basement and enters, finding a group of security guys with special high-velocity guns waiting for him. They're like electric guns of some kind, and he takes them out with ease, like he runs around, just knocks them all out almost at once. And then the door in the sub-basement, Iris is open before Barry, revealing a darkened chamber, and the amplified voice of Victor Vesp beckons him to enter. Barry hesitates, but a monitor nearby switches on, letting him know that Wally has been captured. Barry lets Hunter know what's happened and enters the chamber, where a platform connects the door to the bank of monitors where Vesp sits and waits. The small, frail Vesp, with Slow right next to him holding on to Wally. monologues about how the Flash has remained an urban legend, moving so fast that he's never clearly seen and never communicates to the public. And then Slow goes to push Wally off the platform, and Barry makes the run for him, but he's caught in a magnetic field that holds him above the ground, and so he can't move because he can't get any traction. And Vesp tells Barry that he wants his speed and turns on a device, which he calls an infinity transducer. And it's built into the floor of the chamber, and it connects... It's a different device, which shoots a bolt of energy into Barry. He focused in on Keystone City by narrowing down the Flash's range of activities, and then discovered a newspaper story about a crime scene investigator who was struck by lightning and doused in chemicals in his lab, and removes Barry's mask, revealing that he had figured out his identity as well. And I like that. It shows that he's a pretty smart bad guy. Wally is shocked to see that his uncle is the Flash, and Vesp continues his speech. He says he's hypothesized that Barry has become linked to an extra-dimensional energy source in the accident and wants to redirect it to himself using a machine he's invented called an infinity transducer, which is built into the floor of the room that they're in, and it basically consists of the entire chamber. And the machine turning on makes Barry howl in pain, as well as flicker the lights in the chateau when Hunter goes running for the basement. Barry gets hit by more energy beams, making him shed lightning, and there's an aura forms around him, which Vesp sticks his hand into, and he seems to succeed in stealing a measure of speed. And Hunter enters the room, but Barry tells him to stand back, and Barry starts to transform into pure energy, and they call this going Nova in the script. And Wally, deciding he needs to act, stomps on Slow's foot and makes him drop his gun, and then he grabs the gun, throws it into the aura, and it explodes and causes some sort of chain reaction, and Vesp is hit by a lightning bolt that sends him into some sort of slow motion seizure. Time slows down for a moment, and Wally thinks he sees a second Barry standing off to the side before time speeds back up again. And Slow runs for it as the ceiling starts to collapse, and he apparently can just sneak by police really easily because he somehow got into the chateau past the SWAT team and somehow gets out of it past the SWAT team. Does Slow have superpowers? The script never addresses that. Barry reaches critical Slow runs for it, and Hunter shoves Wally out of the way, taking the weight of a steel beam himself. And then Barry reaches critical mass and screams, going Nova. Lightning shoots out of him and envelops Wally, who briefly turns translucent before the scene fades to white. So yeah, that's a really cool intro, I think, and it's not how Barry Allen dies in the comics, but I think if we're going to do a Wally West movie and we don't have 100 different things leading up to this, then I think this is a pretty good starting point. It's a well-constructed intro to the movie. It then dissolves to the present day with the now adult Wally arriving at a fancy restaurant for a date, and his girlfriend Connie breaks up with him there, criticizing his lack of direction in life and always being late, and even produces her new replacement boyfriend who Wally starts a fight with. Now this scene kind of makes both sides look kind of shitty because Wally's being a bit of a dick, but at the same time, she's breaking up with him for understandable reasons, yet has already picked out a replacement boyfriend. It's wow, kind of a bitch. And then the boyfriend's his name is Greg, and Wally is calling him Rick even after he finds out his name, and at one point he suggests that he should go shave his ass, and I'm you can really tell Goyer wanted to bring Ryan Reynolds in to play Wally West, and I think Ryan Reynolds would have done a good job with it. But some of these lines that they give Wally in here do kind of feel like Goyer's trying to mimic sort of what Ryan Reynolds' kind of style of improvisation is. And it's you can kind of hear Ryan Reynolds saying it in your head, but at the same time, he would probably improvise a better line if you left it up to him. It's a very strange thing, and it only happens one or two more times where it's okay, that's very obviously meant to be a Ryan Reynolds line. But no, that fight scene is ridiculous. And he throws an ice cream at the guy, and they just start fighting in the restaurant. But then we go to the Keystone City Jail drunk tank, where Kyer arrives to let Wally out, and he's now a police captain. And, he's dressing Wally down. This is where we find out that he's dating Iris. And Wally is picked up by the now wheelchair-bound Hunter who bailed him out and drives him back to Iris's house in a specially set-up car with it has hand controls for everything, which is a really cool idea. And it is something that does actually exist. It would be cool just to see that on screen, just this kind of, specially set-up car. And so Iris, who is painting in her art studio, asks Wally how long he's been staying with her, and we learn that not only has Wally dropped out of 4 different colleges, he also doesn't have a full-time job, and she tells him that he's afraid to commit to anything, and has been ever since the night Barry died, and encourages him to finally get his life together. So this is sort of setting up the arc of him being the young guy who's unsure of his life, and is kind of just coasting, and it's a story arc. It's basically kind of a coming-of-age story for him, where he finally finds a purpose. So this is all very, fairly well-done stuff. And Barry drives out to the Flash Memorial in a park located where Vesp's chateau once stood. A statue of Barry as the Flash stands on a smooth black base with the names of those he saved on it and has his birth and death dates on there. And Wally looks at his reflection in the base, lost in reverie as it starts to rain. A voice calls out his name several times and thunder crashes. Wally tries to run for it, but he gets struck by lightning, and time seems to slow down. He wakes up in the hospital with Iris and 3 doctors, including a Dr. Bates, standing over him. As Bates explained what happened to him, Wally's perception of time seems to slow, and with everything around him having a strange blue shimmer. And it's this thing called blue shifting that they talk about. It's part of like some of the scientific background that Goyer looked up when he was writing this. He put a fair amount of that into the script. Time speeds back up again, with Bates saying that his perception of time could have been affected by the strike, but he also says he's recovering well. As the doctors leave, Wally tells Iris that he thought he heard Barry's voice right before the lightning strike. And this is where we go to Iron Heights Prison, where Vesp is in the yard reading a newspaper article about Wally's accident, and he's moving unnaturally slowly, and a convict G-Dog takes notice, and this is where we find out that Vesp has been nicknamed the Turtle in prison. So yeah, Goyer picked a very odd choice for main villain for this script, and there's another villain who shows up later on, but the Turtle is a character who is kind of a joke in the comics from what I've seen. Like, he's not like a serious threat or anything, but Goyer took him in this and kind of really amped him up and made him a legitimately threatening villain, so I gotta give him credit for that. But G-Dog goes to meet him in his cell later to offer Vesp protection, and Vesp instead offers him chocolates, which G-Dog accepts before refusing the offer. And G-Dog threatens him, and Vesp responds by explaining how the accident slowed down his metabolism, forcing him to take things slowly and plan things out. He keeps a tank full of snails and explains how they're very neurotoxic and can cause paralysis, and he injected some of their venom into the chocolates, and then G-Dog collapses, paralyzed, and Vesp smothers him with a pillow. So yeah, pretty cool, threatening scene for the villain. Vesp then meets with Slow in the visitation room, and one thing I like about these two characters is that there seems to be a genuine friendship between the two of them, and unfortunately they never really go into it, but they do genuinely seem to care about each other in a way and look after each other, which I think is kind of neat. And he tells Slow to surveil Wally and see if anything unusual happens. And then Iris and Hunter go to visit Wally in the hospital, and they find him up and about and eating voraciously, and he has also grown a full beard, long hair, and long nails overnight. He talks with Hunter outside, where they are being observed at a distance by Slow, and he tells Hunter all about what's going on with him, including the time-lapse spells he falls into. And Hunter tells him that Barry experienced these exact same symptoms when he first started tapping into the Speed Force, as they called it. And Wally has another slowdown episode right here of everything ahead of him being blue, and when he looks back at Hunter, everything is red, and it says, oh, this will be explained later, and I'm guessing it's one of the scientific exposition things they talk about later, because they don't quite explain. It's not like an important plot point or anything, it's just part of how his powers work. And then, time speeds up again, and Hunter speculates that Barry must have transferred some energy over to Wally right before he died, and that it remained dormant up until the lightning strike woke it up. And so that's a good sort of shorthand version of how Wally gets his powers, because if I'm not mistaken in the comics, the lightning strike in the lab happens to Barry, and then later on it also happens to Wally, so the exact same 1 in a million event happens again. So I feel like simplifying things here is a good way to go about it for a movie. And so Wally meets with Dr. Bates, who introduces him to Dr. Jerry McGee, a Star Labs scientist who wants to help him understand his powers and believes he can do so because he ran a program for the Defense Department that dealt with optimizing soldier performance. So Hunter drives Wally to the lab, where Wally flirts with an attractive female employee in the parking lot who shuts him down, and Hunter just looks at him and goes, "Smooth, West," which was a pretty funny line. And so they enter the Human Performance Facility, where they meet with Jerry and scientist Otto Vigland, as well as Tina McGee, Jerry's ex, who was the woman Wally just met outside, which was pretty funny. And so Tina attaches what's called a C-pod to track Wally's vital signs, and in between more unsuccessful flirting, she doesn't date patients or younger men, she says. She tells him he'd have to go over 3,000 miles per hour in order for their cameras not to pick him up. And so Wally enters into a runner's stance on the test track and takes off, and we see things from his perspective with everything slowed down, and we even hear the sound of multiple sonic booms as he breaks the sound barrier. And we go back to real time as the scientists are all knocked unconscious from the blowback, and they follow the path of destruction he leaves in his wake, tracking him for over 90 miles before finding him naked and smoking in a crater. Now there's this thread here that kind of gets started, like the whole thing about him, like his hair growing really long really quickly and all that. and his nails growing really long in the beard and stuff. That never really gets dealt with again, so it just seems kind of like they're paying lip service to the ideas of what, being really fast would do to you. And this idea of him not being able to control how fast he's going and just going for 96 miles at a stretch and destroying a bunch of stuff. It's never really an issue again either, so some minor flaws are apparent here. And Wally wakes up 2 days later, seeing a report on TV about the destruction. And Iris, Hunter, and the science team are there, and they explain that nobody was hurt, but that the property damage was catastrophically expensive. There's also a lot of science talk about his metabolism and how he gains more mass as he gets faster, and they say he hits with the punch of a howitzer, which is kind of cool. I like the way they describe his powers here. It all sounds really cool and interesting the way they describe it. And like the science talk here, it's not really Voyager-level stupid technobabble. It actually feels like real scientific talk, at least to me it does. And yeah, it's describing an absurd superpower, but the fact that they managed to ground it in real science as much as they do, I think is kind of cool. And Wally tries to leave the building, but he's bombarded by reporters, and he's confronted by a city official named McMillan who says that Wally will be held responsible for the damage and should get a good lawyer. So he goes back inside and he tells Hunter that it was no wonder Barry kept his identity secret. And Hunter then takes Wally to Barry's old cabin, showing him a secret basement where multiple Flash costumes were kept. And he says that only he and Iris knew that Barry was the Flash, and that he wanted to let the Flash remain a legend, as a legend was incorruptible. And Hunter says that he believes Barry not only intended to pass down his powers to Wally, but his purpose as well. It encourages Wally to become the Flash himself. And so that's one thing the script is doing, is that it's actually dealing with the idea of a public identity and a legacy character, which at the time this was being written, neither of those had really been dealt with on film. Public identities are just sort of a thing in the MCU now, and Iron Man kind of opened that up by the way Iron Man ended with him going, I am Iron Man, but this would have really dealt with the idea first, and it would have grappled with it a bit more, which I think is really cool. And the idea of him being the legacy version of a character has yet to really be done in film. I feel like maybe the Falcon and Winter Soldier series will deal with that in terms of Captain America, which could be neat, but we'll see how that moves going forward. And the screen goes white, and we go to Gardner Fox Arena, a reference to Gardner Fox, who was a big part of Flash's creation, where a charity event has been set up with the Flash going up against the local hockey team, the Keystone Combines, with Iris, Kyer, and the McGees in attendance. And backstage, Hunter is upset with Wally, who has hired a sports agent to help brand him, having accrued $20 million worth of endorsement deals. And Wally hands Hunter what's called a rally monkey, which is a stuffed monkey with a lightning bolt on it. So he's definitely branding and merchandising the Flash image, which is something Hunter is just completely aghast at. And here comes another very obvious Ryan Reynolds line where he tells him to unclench his butt, which is kind of funny, kind of what the fuck. Ryan Reynolds could probably make that funny or do something funnier with it. But no, Wally tells Hunter to calm down as he needs the money to pay off the damage to the city, and he heads out into the arena, taking some time to dump Jerry off in the cow pasture so he can flirt some more with Tina, before getting on the ice and moving so fast it looks like there are 6 of him facing off against the Combines. And Hunter watches from the tunnel, disappointed, and wheels off, and we see that Slow is watching him. And we get a series of scenes showing Wally's growing celebrity, including appearing on TRL, which kind of dates this, attending a movie premiere, and pitching and hitting at the same time at Dodger Stadium, and even appearing in advertisements, like he has like a Nike ad where he's in character as the Flash. And he then has dinner with Tina at that same fancy restaurant from before, having lured her there under the pretense of discussing her findings on his abilities. And she discusses it for a while, all while Wally gets his picture taken with fans, eats his food so fast it just blinks away, and screws with the ex's new boyfriend by stripping and redressing him, because, they're eating dinner there as well. Wally also gets Tina to talk about her relationship with Jerry, which only lasted 6 months and was torpedoed by his anger issues and his competitive streak. And there's a moment where Wally ignores a siren, saying that he's not the superhero, he just plays one, so he's becoming a bit arrogant from his celebrity. And Barry speaks with Iris at her house while going over designs for merchandise, and she warns him not to let the power get to his head as it can get addicting, which she feels happened to Barry as well, that he got addicted to the risk and that's what got him killed. And we then go to Wally at an autograph signing event sponsored by Nike, where he gets a call from Hunter, who says he's on a plane, he's flying back from Detroit, and that the landing gear won't open and tells Wally he has to rescue all of them. And Wally hesitates for a moment, but with the crowd watching, he just can't back down, and he speeds off to the airport. And the crew is going to attempt to ditch the plane in the river, and Wally talks to Kyer, offering the entire crew of the plane, offering to get the entire crew and passengers off the plane before it hits the water. And speaking of Hunter over the communicator, he tells Wally to save him last. So he's like, don't let our personal relationship get in the way. And as Slow watches from the crowd while he gets ready, the plane's engines flame out, and the hydraulic flaps freeze up, forcing Wally to move even faster than he would have before. So Wally springs into action, climbing aboard the plane as it begins to fall apart, and begins rescuing the passengers and crew, which is shown in what's called hyper slow motion. He even saves a few who have been flung from the cabin or flying through the air, and he actually runs on the air, which is kind of cool. And then finally, only Hunter and the little girl are left inside, and the latter drops a stuffed animal, which is actually a turtle, as Wally gets her out. He then goes for Hunter, and notices that inside the stuffed animal is similar circuitry to Vesp's machine from the beginning, and it explodes, but Wally gets Hunter out of there before passing out. Tina gets him to come too, and he says he went somewhere else and thought he could hear Barry again. So yeah, that is a very, very cool action scene for the Flash, like the kind of stuff I want to see super speed used for in a movie. In fact, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the mansion explosion scene in X-Men Apocalypse, only it's a bit better than that. Like, that movie, it's like a weird comedy scene that comes in right after a super dramatic scene, and then is followed by a super dramatic scene, whereas this is just a really cool action sequence for the Flash. And so yeah, Wally is definitely on the path to being a hero here. Now, if there's one problem I have here, it's that the whole Wally becoming a celebrity and it going to his head, that's basically 15 pages of this script, maybe a little bit more. And so it makes the script feel a little bit more episodic than it really should, but it's not a huge problem. And so at Hunter's house, he and Wally talk about what a rush it was for him to save all those people, and Hunter says he felt the same thing when he was a cop and that he misses it. And they then discuss the bomb and the stuffed animal, and Hunter says it has to be Vesp who is now gunning for them. And so that leads Wally to visit Vesp at Iron Heights, who doesn't deny planting the bomb. He says that he's slowly winding down because of what happened and that he'll become a statue if he doesn't find a cure. And even says there will be more tragedies, and when he's done studying Wally's powers, he'll take them for himself. Like, this guy doesn't even care. Like, he's just saying, I'm going to get what I want to get. So once again, Vesp is a good villain. The Turtle is actually a cool villain in this. And so we go to Star Labs, and Tina is monitoring Wally, and he speculates that Vesp must have been trying to steal the speed again on the plane. And then segues into some talk about how Tina is legitimately impressed with Wally's act of heroism, and some more science talk about how the speed gives him a euphoric feeling like runner's high. And he offers to let her feel what it's like for himself, and he holds her in his arms, and he creates what's called a no-slip zone around him as he runs so that they don't they don't burst into flames while they're running, their clothes stay on. And he takes her running, and he runs her out to a restaurant in California. And he then uses his vibration abilities to let her see the world the way he does, and even walks her out on the water like he's able to. And Wally sees a figure apparently watching them, but he's gone in an eye blink. So yeah, they're building the relationship here, and it does work pretty well. It's not the greatest romantic subplot in the world, but I think it reads decently enough. And so we then go to Iron Heights, where Vesp is packing his belongings as if in anticipation of leaving, when a being seemingly composed of electrical energy breaks through the prison walls and heads for Vesp's cell, and he spins his arms and creates cyclones to knock guards down. And then the being comes into focus, only vaguely seen in dim lighting, but it looks like it's wearing the Flash's costume. And then it snaps its fingers and causes a sonic boom, which knocks a guard over a railing to his death, and then bursts into Vesp's cell, meeting him face to face. And Vesp says, "You're late." He goes, "Traffic." So this new evil speedster talks in this kind of variable tone of voice, like it vibrates and goes up and down and stuff like that. And sometime later, we see Wally and Tina return to Star Labs, and he successfully won her over, and they've kind of agreed to officially start the relationship. And meanwhile, Vesp is now situated in a new underground layer, and he's talking to Slow, saying thank you for, looking after this place for me and setting this up while I was gone. So once again, more of that friendship. And he has a new bank of monitors, which now allows him to observe all of Keystone City. That's when a crimson figure blinks in behind Vesp, giving us our first good look at Zoom, the reverse Flash, who is vibrating so fast his face and voice are completely distorted. Vesp tells Zoom that he purposefully let the Flash live, as he feels he moved too quickly with Barry Allen and doesn't want to repeat that mistake. He instead wants to test Wally West and learn his limits. Zoom says he'll give Vesp a test. It is gone in a blink. Slow tells Vesp to be careful with Zoom, saying the speed has made him unpredictable, and Vesp responds by saying that he is being careful, which is why he's using Zoom as a guinea pig before attempting the procedure on himself. So Vesp is a bit of a manipulator here, and Zoom is going to be his muscle. Now Zoom plays out really cool as we go along. So next we see Wally and Tina being escorted into the Keystone City Police Command Center where they're told about Vesp's breakout, and Kyer, Murillo, Hunter, and Jerry flat out tell him that he's a suspect as he's the only person capable of doing it and has a motive, revenge for Barry. And Tina backs up Wally by explaining about their date, which she says ended up with them visiting Paris as well, and this irks Jerry, who keeps prodding Wally until they almost come to blows, and Wally manages to restrain himself at the last minute. Then Wally mentions the figure he saw in California, saying he felt someone else tap into the Speed Force and he thinks it might be Barry, but everyone else thinks he's crazy because after all, everyone knows Barry is dead. And so Jerry and Hunter both leave, and that's when reports of more incidents are brought in. A path of destruction has been left across the country happening at 5-minute intervals, and security footage of a building collapse in Seattle seems to momentarily show an image of the Flash. The police are still suspecting Wally, but that's when Tina puts together the pattern on a map. The locations of the incidents all spell out, "Catch me if you can," and only the dot on the exclamation point hasn't been formed. It's situated over Pittsburgh, and Wally jumps into costume and runs off. So yeah, this is already, getting grand scale and crazy, and I love that about it. And he arrives at the indicated location, the center of the Three Sisters bridges on the Allegheny River. Zoom arrives on the scene, moving faster than Wally can and flipping over a car. He briefly comes into view face-to-face with Wally, but moving too fast for anyone else to see. Wally asks if he's Barry, to which he responds, "Not Barry, Zoom." And he oscillates so fast he seems to vanish, popping into sight just long enough to punch Wally in the head. Now Goyer talks about, this is in the script, Goyer describes it as he's Dopplering in and out of places. And Goyer actually talks about how one of the scientific things he looked into is stuff like the Doppler effect, and so he was planning on incorporating that into the movie, which is actually really cool visual when you think about it. Zoom then starts creating sonic booms by snapping his fingers, again, shattering car windows and knocking Wally back, and he mocks Wally, calling him a pretender and saying he's there to put Wally in his place. Now, this is something that Zoom actually does in the Wally West comics. Now, his backstory is different, and we'll talk about that when we get there, but like his introduction is he's just standing there snapping his fingers and causing sonic booms and like shattering glass and stuff, and that's how he announces himself to Wally, and that's really cool. And the way he talks and sort of vibrates and seems like he's almost loosely connected to the world, that's from Zoom in the comics as well. Only there his powers are quite different. Instead of just being super fast like Wally, he's like, they bring in Jay Garrick to explain what Zoom is like, explain how Zoom's powers work, and he makes like a presentation on the whiteboard explaining how he's like come loose from time, and he moves through time at a different speed than everybody else does, so he's technically time traveling. It's very weird, but what they do here is fine too. Zoom then starts to make the bridge shake with his vibrations, causing it to sway and pedestrians and cars to fall into the water. Wally jumps into action, trying to save them all, but ultimately it's too much, and he returns to the bridge, collapsing from exhaustion. Zoom approaches, vibrating his finger like a drill and saying he's going to put Wally out of his misery, but then something happens. Zoom staggers back, seemingly in pain, and his vibrations stop, making him visible to the other people on the bridge. He shouts that he needs more speed and "give it back" before speeding off, leaving Barry laying there on the bridge. Once again, another cool action scene, and now that Zoom has kind of been introduced into the movie as his own villain, he's a very cool villain, provides some very cool fights with Wally West. Love what this script is doing at this point. And Wally returns to Star Labs, bringing a torn and bloody piece of Zoom's costume with him. And Wally's upset about what happened and how people died because he wasn't able to save them. Tina tries to give him the rest, but he says he can't because Zoom's motives are clearly personal, and he's going to be out there doing this, until I respond or something like that. But he blacks out and collapses. And we then go to Vesp's lair, where Zoom confronts him about losing his speed. And Vesp says he worked an override into the circuitry that allows him to tap into the Speed Force, and cut him off when he moved to kill the Flash against orders. And then Vesp, cuts Zoom off even more, making him fall to the floor, and then forces him to crawl to him and kiss his shoe. He's saying, "Remember who holds the leash." I'm like, ooh, I love the interplay between these two bad guys. Tina is examining Zoom's blood when a now awake Wally walks in, and she says she's trying to uncover his identity. It's then that Kyer and Murillo arrive, apologizing to Wally for their suspicions, and now present Jerry McGee as a suspect, as he visited Vesp the day of his escape from Iron Heights. Wally, convinced of this, runs over to Jerry's house and searches it, only to find him dead in the cellar with the words "Even the Flash can't be everywhere at once" written in blood on the wall. Then back at the lab, Zoom shows up and he's speeding around Tina and the two cops, acting threatening, and Tina tries to talk him down, saying that he'll prematurely age if he spends too much time at a high speed, because she's found that out from looking at his blood sample, that he is going to be degenerated by this speed if he doesn't stop. And this angers Zoom, who makes cyclones by spinning his arms, knocking her back before turning on Kyer and Murillo. The building explodes just as Wally arrives, and he runs into the chaos, finding Kyer and Murillo, but Tina is nowhere in sight. Kyer dies in Wally's arms, pleading with him to stop Zoom, and Wally lets out an anguished shriek. And the script seems to have forgotten that Kyer was dating Iris, because we never get Iris's reaction to this. And you killed off Fred Kyer. That kind of sucks. And I don't recall if the script actually addresses what happens to Murillo after this point, or if it just forgets him. But yeah, that's something I noticed. And Tina then wakes up in Vesp's lair, who explains that they're in a secret sub-basement beneath Star Labs, constructed on his orders, and there was talk earlier about how in their early days before they became self-sustaining, they were reliant on an anonymous benefactor, and he was that benefactor who secretly funded them. So cool twist here too, that like he was, you know, he's been he talks about playing the long game, and he actually has been playing the long game, and I think that's really cool. I love that. And here's something I don't love. He explains his motivation, saying that he was once an academic who theorized about the Speed Force but was shut out of academia because of that. Okay, that's actually a pretty decent motivation. He wants to steal the speed so he can prove his theories and get back at, you know, the establishment that shut him out, right? Well, no. He also says that he's going to use the Speed Force to reshape and improve society, bring up societal progress in line with technological progress. And it's not really clear what he plans to do. Like he says, oh yes, people will die. There will be massive cultural shifts. And I'm like, how are you going to do that just by making yourself fast? I don't really get it. And it's basically, it just feels like a nonsensical motive rant that doesn't quite add up. And I'm not a huge fan of this. Like, this is the one part where I'm like, okay, Vesp is not as good as he was before because his motives are just muddled. It's like, I don't know, it could have been, specified what exactly he's going to do instead of just, I'll change society, blah, blah, blah. And then Tina does say, hey, you're just another 5-foot-tall skinny dude with a chip on his shoulder, but go ahead, tell me your motive. So maybe that's supposed to be what his deal is. And his grandiose speech about changing society is just him being full of himself. But at the same time, it's not a great speech. He says he needs Tina to fix the aging issue with the stolen speed, though, and he says he'll be willing to torture her to do so. And so we go back to Wally, who concentrates and begins to track Zoom using the traces of electromagnetic radiation he left behind. And Wally finds him standing atop a building in Keystone City, now wearing a black suit in place of his red one. I don't like the black suit thing. Zoom, like most of the other Reverse Flashes, he wears a yellow and red costume, which is literally the reverse of the Flash's costume. Here it's just like, he's black because he's a bad guy. I'm like, okay, whatever. And time slows down just as lightning strikes, and Zoom fingers the lightning as it is frozen in midair. And he talks about how he changes because they were supposed to just discredit him and frame him for crimes. That's part of their test, but then things went wrong on the bridge. That's essentially what happened. And he also talks about how he always wanted to be a hero like Barry, but he doesn't anymore. And instead, he wants to get back at those who patronized and pitied him, starting with Wally. And Zoom then tells Wally that he hasn't suffered enough loss to deserve his powers, despite Wally saying, I've suffered loss, I lost Barry. But he's talking about like, no, Wally, you were handed your powers, and you have to be broken down, whereas I was broken down and then got powers and learned who I was. You have to get broken down now. And then he throws the lightning bolt at him as time speeds up. Like, oh, that's such a cool visual. The lightning bolt is just hanging there in the air, and then he just grabs it and throws it at him. Like, this would be such a cool scene to see in the movie. Wally falls off the building, but whirls his arms to create a cushion of air before he hits the ground, but then Zoom runs down the building and slams into Wally, and they crash into the sewers. Then Wally gets thrown up into the air and lands on the street. Then Zoom comes up and says, if you want Tina, follow me, if you can. And then this chase ensues across the city, and like Zoom is just knocking into whatever he can, and Wally is trying to contain the damage while he goes. And Zoom eventually leads him to a disused railway tunnel and through a secret entrance into Vesp's underground lair. And then Wally lays into Zoom hard, savagely beating him from 12 different directions until he sinks to the ground. And man, this is just crescendoing. I love it. Wally, overcome by speed mania, screams at Zoom to get back up, but he can't, and his vibrations have stopped, and he tries to goad Wally into killing him, and that's when Wally removes his mask, revealing Hunter's face, ravaged like a meth addict. So Hunter was Zoom all along, and if you know your comics, you know Hunter Zolomon is Zoom, who he's different here, but I think this is a really good characterization regardless of what he is in the comics. But he talks about how Slow approached him at the arena, and Vesp offered to fix his spine, and he says, like he talks about how his spinal cord is almost completely severed and only so many nerve impulses can get through. And the way Vesp explains what he's going to do is that he's going to tap into the Speed Force and basically he can walk because tapping into the Speed Force allows his those limited nerve impulses to go through faster. And so when he's using the speed, he can walk. And this is in exchange for luring Wally to a place of his choosing. The device was surgically attached to Hunter's lower back, and the plane disaster was set up in order to steal speed on a smaller scale than what Vesp tried with Barry. And it worked, allowing Hunter to walk again. Vesp wanted to keep testing Wally as well as discredit him with property damage, but then things got out of hand on the bridge. And this is when Hunter just goes into his motive rant here, talking about how he went through endless surgeries and rehabilitation, watching for years as Wally screwed up his life and squandered what he had, only to get superpowers in return, which he considers unearned. And I love this idea that you could take so much from him without him actually saying it, that you almost say he regrets saving Wally's life and that he got crippled. He was, the steadfast friend to Barry who always wanted to be a hero. And instead of getting, superpowers for it, he got crippled, and the boy he saved screwed up his life and got powers instead. And he feels that Wally just doesn't deserve to be the Flash, that he deserves it. And he's just sick with envy, and the speed addiction has just destroyed his mind and made him even crazier. I love this characterization of Hunter's element. I think it's fantastic for this script. And Wally tells him that the speed has gotten to him and warped his mind, and Vesp's voice is heard saying he planned on that, and the lights turn on, revealing them to be in a bigger version of the chamber from the chateau with the Infinity transducer installed in it. And Vespa's has monitors, and Slow is nearby with a gun on Tina, and it's a deliberate reflection of what happened at the beginning, and Vespa even points it out. And Wally runs at him, but he gets caught in a magnetic field just like Barry, and the energy beams converge on Wally, and he goes Nova, disappearing in a flash of light. But, however, Wally isn't dead, but has been hurtled through the Speed Force back in time to the moment when time stood still in Vesp's chamber, the night that Barry died, and everything is frozen in place, like it's a frozen moment in time. And he hears a voice, and he turns around, and he finds a spectral version of Barry composed entirely of light. So we go back to the present-day timeline. Zoom turns on Vesp, sucking the speed energy out of his machine. Then he tells Vesp, "You didn't think I had the intelligence, but the speed lets me think faster, and I figured out how to jam your device with cross signals, and I did it this morning." And then he goes to push the button, and Vesp pushes the button, and then Zoom pretends to be getting knocked down by it, but then he pops back up going, "Just kidding." And so Slow moves to protect Vesp, but Zoom hits him a dozen times, knocking him out of the fight and badly wounding him. And he then forces Vesp to crawl to him and kiss both of his boots, and it's a cool reflection of that scene from before. And then he grabs Vesp, vibrating him until his heart speeds up too fast, and he enters cardiac arrest and dies. So, Vesp gets taken out, and Zoom is now like the head honcho villain, and I'm just so invested in this. The script is just really, really good. So back in that frozen moment, Barry explains that he didn't die, but he became one with the Speed Force, forever trapped in this one singular moment, and he actually says that he can explore wherever, like he can explore the entire world, he can go wherever, but time never moves forward. However, he was able to feel Wally every time he ran. Every time someone taps into the Speed Force, he can feel it. And he tells Wally not to blame himself for his death, as he would have been captured whether or not Wally had been there. And in fact, it was Wally's interference that stopped Vesp and saved the world. So you get the idea that a lot of Wally's sort of indecision and kind of and even some of the stuff where he's saying, like, I'm not a hero, blah, 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 it's because he feels bad about the fact that he got Barry in the situation where he was killed in the first place, but now he's able to get closure on that. So it's sort of the end of his character arc. Part of his character arc is concluding here. And it's good stuff. Barry then explains if they combine powers, it might be enough for Wally to break free, but that somebody needs to stay behind and hold the door open. And Wally offers to let Barry escape instead, but he declines, saying he's had a good run, and he effectively passes the torch to Wally, and it's just, such a heartwarming little moment. I love seeing these two meet again. It's a great scene. And Wally swears to find a way to get him back, and Barry just says, "Hey, tell Iris I love her, won't you?" And then they go ahead and they do the thing, and Wally is like moving through a tunnel of light. And then he returns to his time in the ruins of Star Labs, and they badly wounded Slow, points him in the direction that Zoom went, and I don't think it's actually mentioned whether or not Slow dies. So once again, maybe Slow just miraculously escaped. Once again, that's his superpower. He points him in the direction that Zoom went, and Wally pursues. Zoom collapses 2 skyscrapers and goes to Tina, who's on top of a bluff where he left her. Now, there's a missed opportunity here, because they could have made this the same bluff where Barry and Wally were talking at the beginning of the script and have a bit of a confrontation with Zoom here, and have it be like his mentor figure, Hunter Zolomon, who's gone bad, as opposed to his good father figure, who is Barry Allen. Like, they could have done something with this, but they don't. But Tina tries to talk him down, saying that the speed will kill him, and Hunter seems to go back to normal for a moment, talking about how he can't handle going back to being broken again, like he can't do it. But then he comes right back with the Zoom vibrations taking over again, saying that Hunter is dead and was too weak to handle the power. So Zoom has had Hunter has had a psychotic break and has just completely lost himself. And in a fit of rage, Zoom throws Tina from the cliff, only for Wally to catch her just before she hits the ground. And then Wally, he safely deposits Tina in the city, and she's telling him about, what Hunter's mental state is, only for Zoom to slam into him at Mach 10, which takes him all the way to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. And then a chase between the two ensues, with Wally and Zoom racing each other all the way around the world, through national parks, over the Great Wall of China, past the Great Pyramid, etc. And like, oh, this is so cool! And there's even one bit where they kick up a storm off Japan, and Wally stops to help disperse a tsunami before it crashes into a fishing village. And Wally is still running away from Zoom, and he can't figure out how to stop him, but Tina tells him he has to stop and let Zoom take his speed, which will burn him out and kill him, because at the rate he's consuming speed, it's basically going to make him age prematurely and die. A little bit like the ending of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And Wally stops on some salt flats in Australia, telling Tina his feelings are genuine while he waits for Zoom. And as Zoom approaches, Wally unleashes his speed lightning, which Zoom at first enjoys the rush of, but his expression turns to horror as it makes him rapidly age before turning into dust. This whole climax of him just running all the way around the world, and then Wally having to stop running and give him what he wants. It's a bit of a cliche because it's been done in a bunch of things. It's been done in, the one that always comes to mind is the Ang Lee Hulk, where you have like the absorbing man, Nick Nolte, monologuing about how he wants to take all the gamma energy or stuff like that. And then Eric Bana just goes, take it off! Or whatever the heck actually happens in that scene at the end because it's lit so poorly. But no, it's really cool here, and it makes sense with what they're setting up in the script. And so Wally, all out of speed for the time being, begins his trek back to Keystone City. And then it cuts to Wally and Iris visiting Barry's memorial, the second one, and there's now a new one which has a statue of Wally by its side. And Wally uses his vibrations to remove Barry's death date from the memorial, and he swears to Iris that he will find a way to get Barry back, and he says, believe in me, Iris, believe I can do this. So that's a sad little moment. I wish she would have mentioned the fact that her current boyfriend is dead, but, I guess it is what it is. And then Wally goes to Barry's old secret lab under the cabin, where he talks with Tina, being open and honest about his feelings for her and agreeing to take it slow, saying, this is the first time I've ever just wanted to sit back and enjoy the moment. I've always been moving from one thing to the next. So once again, we're doing character arc stuff here, which is pretty good. And then Wally hears a message through his flash earpiece about a hostage crisis in Chicago, and he speeds off into the distance, narrating one last time about, they say lightning never strikes twice, but it did to me. I'm Wally West, and I'm the fastest man alive. He just runs off, and it ends. This script, I will admit, it's not flawless. There's some weird pacing, like the whole celebrity thing starts and is over really quickly. Flash becomes a hero and is loved and is immediately suspected of all these crimes, but then the whole frame-up thing is over almost as quickly as it begun, and it could have been paced out a little bit different. It is kind of weird how Hunter is just suddenly oh, I'm on a plane, and they don't set up that he's going anywhere. Some of the dialogue with Wally, in a couple of places, it gets a little too much, we're writing this for Ryan Reynolds, ooh. That being said, I would have loved to have seen Ryan Reynolds as Wally West. I think that would have been very good casting. And Vesp's motivations and what he's going to do with the speed is just kind of I don't even know what you're talking about, dude. Probably the weakest part of the script right there is that long motive rant where he's talking about changing society, and it's not even clear what he's going to change about it. It's almost like Apocalypse in X-Men Apocalypse, where he just keeps talking about how the world is bad and I'm going to make it better, and he never exactly says how he's going to do that. It reminds me of that to an extent. But other than that, I think this is a really solid script with just a little bit more tweaking would have been... I think it's fantastic as it is, but I think with a little bit more tweaking, it would have been really good. Now, unfortunately, Goyer, and now I don't think, once again, I'm not really sure Goyer would have been the guy to direct this, but just on a script level, I think this is really good, and this is a movie I would want to see. This is a fantastic Flash movie, in my opinion. Now, unfortunately, what ended up happening is that in February of 2007, Goyer announced that he was off the project, and he cited creative differences, and what's interesting about that is he doesn't actually say what the creative differences were. Let me see if I can find the quote. The God's honest truth is that WB and myself simply couldn't agree on what would make for a cool Flash film. I'm quite proud of the screenplay I turned in. I threw my heart into it, and I genuinely think it would have been the basis of a groundbreaking film. But as of now, the studio is heading off in a completely different direction. I expect you'll hear of some new developments on that front shortly. So yeah, they just couldn't agree on what the movie should be, and I wish he would have talked more about it. Now, I've seen speculation that the studio thought it was too dark. I wouldn't describe the script as dark. Like, it's not particularly jokey or humorous, but I don't think it's dark. Like, I mean, it's not Batman. I mean, it's played relatively straight, but I like that about it. I like the fact that it is a good, solid character piece with villains who are legitimately threatening, and it takes the characters seriously, and I like that about it. So, unfortunately, I guess WB didn't see it that way, or else they just didn't like the script. And so Goyer was off, and what's interesting is that, like, within days of him being off it was when it was the same month. That was when they announced Justice League Immortal, which was a very Flash heavy script, which was written by the Mulroneys. Now that's a completely different episode for later on down the line, but that was very Flash heavy, very with Barry and Wally in it. And so it's interesting. He talks about like they were going in a different direction, and we expect some new development soon. And then within the month, they announced the Justice League movie, which also didn't happen. So that's interesting to talk about. And so Goyer was off the script, and he was replaced by Sean Levy, who had just done Night at the Museum, and he had also done those not very good Pink Panther remakes. But I like Night at the Museum, the first and the third movies, and I like Real Steel. And he was said to be, he gets brought on to direct the movie, and he's said to be overseeing a new script, and that will lead into the next script. And with that background out of the way, that brings us up to the next script, which is a draft by Chris Brancato, and it's called a studio draft. This is the one that was turned into the studio executives, essentially, which I think that's what that means, at least. It's dated September 4th, 2007. So I'm assuming this is a draft that Sean Levy was overseeing, because he didn't leave the project until a month after this, so I'm guessing this is one of the versions that he was working on. And the plot to this one is similar in some respects to Goyer's draft, in that it's about Barry Allen and Wally West and their relationship when Wally's, a teenager, and Barry gets killed, and then as an adult, Wally takes on the mantle of the Flash. Only in this version, instead of everybody finding out about the Flash and all that, in this, it's still a secret, and it turns out that there was this conspiracy to take down Barry Allen, which was perpetrated by then mayor of Keystone City, and later becomes the governor of Kansas, Van Savage. Yes, that means exactly what you think it is if you know your DC characters, and I'll get into that later. And it involves, weather satellites and extreme environmentalism, and we get appearances by various Flash rogues who were imprisoned by the Barry Allen version of the Flash, and they show up, and we get Hunter Zolomon in here as well, playing a different role than he did. And so that's pretty much what the plot is. It's Wally who grows up and becomes he basically grows up and becomes a motocross racer, and then he becomes the Flash and has to take on the identity and has to go up against Savage. And that's the plot of this draft. Now, to get right into the nitty-gritty of it, I mean, Chris Brancato, I should mention, has worked mainly as a TV writer. When I looked at his IMDb, the only film work that really stood out to me was Species 2, which I saw that movie years ago. I barely remember anything about it except it brought Mars into the equation, I think. It's been forever since I've seen that, but there was like a male version of Syl, and then there was the clone of Syl. I forget what her name was, but I remember seeing it. I don't remember anything about it, really. I barely remember the first Species, even. And in terms of TV work, a lot of it is on shows I've maybe heard of but not seen, but the thing that really stood out to me was he wrote 3 episodes of Hannibal, including the 2 episodes that were built around the creepy woman who couldn't see faces and cut a Glasgow smile into someone, and she's the one, she ends up in that, Will Graham actually saves her, and she ends up in that, that weird, that thing from Deadpool where they can make it really full of oxygen and then remove the oxygen. It's like that, but she's in that for therapeutic reasons, and then Hannibal kills her basically. But those are some really good episodes of that show if you've not seen it. So yeah, he can be a talented writer, at least in the TV realm. Now this draft, it starts off with a title sequence depicting an aerial view of the Flash speeding through Keystone City, only visible as a blur. And it's a pretty cool visual. I actually like that as a little visual note to open a Flash movie on. I think that's pretty cool. So the titles end, and we meet a 14-year-old Wally West, and I think if I remember, it says in the slug lines, it says circa 1999 or something like that. So yeah, circa 1999. So we're going that far back. And we meet 14-year-old Wally West with a 1,000-yard stare riding on a Greyhound bus to Keystone City. And waiting for him at his destination are his aunt and uncle, Barry and Iris Allen, and Barry is impatiently tapping his lightning bolt ring on a railing. They pick up Wally as he gets off the bus and drive him to their house, and Barry's driving very fast in his Mustang, and Wally clearly enjoys it. And he's less enthused about radio reports about the Flash, saying he thinks the Flash is lame, that in his world nobody helps you have to do it yourself. And after dinner, Wally heads to his room, and we see Barry use his powers to very quickly do the dishes and mop the floors. This is where we get the idea that Barry Allen is the Flash, which is something that Wally never really has to come to grips with in this script. It's very odd the way they do it here. And so we see Wally unpacking in his room, and we see a letter from Child Protective Services of Nebraska saying that his mother is dead and his father is abusive, and that custody has been handed over to Barry and Iris. And that's a very different interpretation of Wally West's father in the comics, because in the comics he's not abusive, he's just not a good father. He's not a bad person, he's just not a very good parent. Whereas here it's like, okay, they kind of villainized him for this, which is strange, and that's why he has this very cynical outlook about no one's gonna help you and stuff like that, because no one was there to help him. And so that's a bit of a sort of a character arc that Wally West has here, which, I'll be honest, it doesn't exactly pay off at all. It kind of just gets dropped after a while, so I don't even really see the point of it. And so in Barry and Iris's room, they're watching the TV news, and it shows Keystone City's mayor, Van Savage, who reveals his plans to make the city go green with a hydroelectric dam, and credits it to Councilwoman Iris Allen, who then appears on TV as well, and Barry tells Iris that he's proud of her. So yeah, she's working for the city council with the mayor. And so after Barry and Iris go to sleep, Wally sneaks out his window and into the garage where he hot-wires Barry's car and takes it for a drive, and he goes 93 in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. And he gets caught and picked up by the police, and Barry meets him at the station where we learn that he works in the crime lab. And he also meets Barry's intern, the 18-year-old Linda Park, and he's clearly smitten, and she's, Wally's major love interest in the comics, and they end up getting married. So it's cool that they put her in here. Barry, trying to bond with Wally, offers him a legal way to go fast and takes him to a barn where they get on a pair of dirt bikes stashed there and go racing through the woods. And Barry gives Wally a speech about how no matter how fast he goes, he can never outrun himself or his problems. So Wally hits a tree root and spills off his bike, and Barry just pops in out of nowhere to check the scratch on his neck, and he discovers the scars from where his father used to beat him with a belt. And Barry tells him that, his past is all behind him and that he has a potentially bright future ahead of him, and we get to see a whole sequence of Barry, Iris, and Wally bonding as a family, and Wally starts to kind of lose his mistrust of other people. That's one thing the script does really well, is these couple of scenes here outlining Barry's relationship with Wally, because with what they're doing here with the abusive past and stuff like that, the way Barry is kind of offering him a sense of hope, I think is really pretty well done. And unfortunately, I'm just going to say it now, it's one of the few well done things here. And so one night, Wally is visiting Barry at the crime lab, and he leaves the room to talk with Linda, and to get interrupted by a cop named Hunter Zolomon, whom this is our introduction, and we learn nothing about him here. And then an explosion rocks the building. Wally returns to the lab, which is on fire, and he finds Barry laying there unconscious. He tries to pull him out, getting splashed with chemicals in the process, and he eventually passes out as cops and firefighters drag him from the building. It then cuts to 10 years later, so 2009-ish, going by the dates they gave, and Wally is now a motocross racer with a red outfit and a white circle and lightning bolt logo. So I'm guessing he based this on Barry's ring, but somehow he managed to get the color scheme and logo of the Flash without knowing Barry was the Flash, and just coincidentally has that as his racing outfit. Very odd. And yeah, this whole motocross thing feels very mid-2000s. It reminds me, having this whole race sequence in here just reminds me of the first Fantastic Four movie, where it's 10 minutes of the movie or something where Johnny Storm goes off and races in the X Games and they go and have their fight outside. It's like, yeah, trying to appeal to the hip kid crowd, I guess. And he's racing and he's doing really well, and he goes too fast over the last jump and he wrecks the bike, losing the title. So he's met by his friend who is, John Harris, who's, stuck in a wheelchair, and we get the idea that he got crippled in an accident. He was a racer as well before that. And he's his bike mechanic, and Iris is there too, and she tells him it's time to get a new job. And she says, I don't want you to end up hurting yourself like John. And so Iris then goes to the Kansas state capitol, as she works as a state senator now. And I'm confused about this. Is this script saying that Keystone City is the state capital of Kansas? Because it's not. In the DC universe, is that supposed to be the capital of Kansas? I don't know. I don't know what the script is saying with that. And she meets with the now governor, Van Savage, and we hear that, he may be running for president, and tells him that she's been alerted to energy being siphoned off from the hydroelectric plant and seemingly being funneled to Savage Energy. Savage Energy. And so Savage promises to look into it, and after Iris leaves, he makes a call to someone called Samantha. And we then go to Savage Energy, where Dr. Mark Marden is testing a satellite's ability to lock on to Keystone City. And he's met by Samantha Stark, who tells him that his activities have drawn attention from a woman he'll have to kill. So, okay, the villain of this script is the governor of Kansas, Van Savage. Now, if you know anything about DC, Vandal Savage is this immortal villain, and we'll get more about his backstory later. But here, I mean, he's the governor. That just seems like it kind of takes the menace away to me. Like, ooh, petty state politician Vandal Savage, who's not even named Vandal Savage. He's named Van Savage. And they don't even clarify it by saying, oh, he's going by, like, oh, say, Peter Van Savage and pretending to be Dutch in descent or something like that. No, his name is just Van Savage. He never goes by Vandal Savage at any point, which is just silly to me. And also, Mark Marden is a Flash villain known as the Weather Wizard, but he never goes there in this and is kind of wasted. And so then we go to the parking lot outside the arena where Wally is, the winner of the race is getting crowded by fans. And then there's this kid who asks, hey, Wally, can you give me a ride? And I should mention, adult Wally West, even though the characters all call him Wally, the script insists in, like, the directions and stuff on calling him Wallace. And I'm like, no, don't, dude. I don't like that very much, because I've never seen anybody call Wally West Wallace in the comics. In fact, I'm pretty sure Wallace West is what they ended up calling the New 52 version of Wally when they did Rebirth and brought back the original and made them two separate characters. The version of Wally West nobody likes is now called Wallace. So yeah, I'm not terribly fond of it. I don't really see the point of it. I guess they're trying to differentiate between adult Wally and kid Wally, but it doesn't really work for me. And he at first refuses to give the kid a ride, but then he sees that the kid is covered in bruises, and so he gives the kid a ride home, and then he tells him, hey kid, toughen up, because when your old man hits you, no one's gonna help you out, so you gotta toughen up and learn how to fight back. So he's being kind of a cynical douchebag here, and then he realizes he's being a cynical douchebag and just says, hey kid, lift some weights, and leaves it on a positive note. And that's really the last time in this thing where we get the whole cynical, mistrustful Wally West thing in this, so we're about 30 pages in, and it's already kind of done. That's the thing about this script, is that it's not super long, but it seems like it seems like a lot happens, but not a lot happens. It's hard to describe. So Iris is at home working on some baking, while the news reports that Van Savage is rumored to be running for president soon. Oh no! Oh no, Vandal Savage's evil plot is that he's going to run for public office. I'm sorry. I mean, it just doesn't have the same ring to it as President Lex. And she has a file on Savage Energy that's on the counter that she's looking at as well. And so she goes out to the greenhouse to get some strawberries, and a storm suddenly rolls in, and a tree gets knocked over, which breaks some of the roof panes. And Wally gets there just in time to hear her shriek and tries to get her out, but she gets struck by lightning and killed as he grabs her hand, while Wally is unharmed by the strike. And then Iris tries to tell Wally something about Barry and his ring, but dies before she can. And then Wally finds a strange metal disc under her collar. It's like a little coin. So okay, this script has killed off Barry Allen and Iris Allen in the space of 30 pages, pretty much. I don't like that, because it kind of like, I don't like how it just disposes of her that quickly. I think that's a little shitty of the script, but maybe that's just me. And so the police arrive on the scene with Hunter Zolomon leading the team, saying he thinks it was some sort of freak accident. And Linda is also there. She's now full-time working with the crime lab, so they've made her a cop here, which I guess is fine for the story. In the comics, she's a reporter. But either way, I mean, it's just cool having Linda Park have a big role in the script. And Wally hands over the little disc for her to analyze. And so Wally goes for a drive in the pouring rain when his bike gets hit and totaled by a bus, only for him to be standing a few feet away unharmed, which is a pretty cool display of the powers. And realizing something isn't right, Wally starts to run, quickly passing 100 miles per hour and dodging lightning bolts, eventually finding himself at the Colorado border in no time. So yeah, that's a cool little way of him to, first, get the idea of his powers. And so Wally, he wakes up at the apartment he shares with John, and his sneaker soles are worn completely smooth. And he explains to John what happened, demonstrating his powers for him, and then pulls out Barry's ring, which he's never worn. And then John examines it, and he rubs his finger across it in a certain way, which makes the Flash costume pop out. And they now know that Barry was the Flash. And Wally then goes to the Allen house, noting the Savage Energy file on the kitchen counter, and finding an old pair of Barry's sneakers, which are worn smooth just like his. Hell, I just realized we're not even 30 pages into this. We're just about to get to the 30-page mark, so a shitload of stuff has happened. Wally and John then attend a memorial for Iris at the dam, which has now been dedicated to her. Wally receives condolences from the attendees, including Savage and Hunter. He asks Linda about the metal object, and she says it'll take a couple more days to get any results, and as she walks off with Hunter, John's encouraging Wally to confess his true feelings for her, but Wally shuts down that line of conversation, saying just don't go there. And it's actually pretty funny, some of the banter here, where John's like, hey, I've seen the girls you've brought home before. I mean, I could tell you feel differently about this one. He's just going like, we're not having this conversation. So yeah, that relationship between these two is kind of fun. And he says, they're going to need to test out his newfound abilities. And so they do just that, going on a road trip where John is driving his van while Wally runs alongside. And even though he's paralyzed, they don't specify that he has like special controls for the van here, like the Goyer script did, so for Hunter Zolomon's car. So taking some points off there. Yeah, you're now just turning into The Visitor, where the crippled woman could just drive a regular car with no problem. If you've not seen The Visitor, please do. That movie is batshit insane. And so they go to Vegas, where Wally practices running up the side of a building, as well as walking on water in a fountain. And he actually has to try a few times to run up the side of the building, which is pretty funny. So yeah, there's some good stuff in this script. And then they go to a club where Wally manages to briefly rewind time to watch a woman walk by a second time so he can check out her ass more than once, and that was pretty funny. And so after they return to Keystone, Wally goes to visit Linda at the police lab, who tells him that the silver object he found on Iris was a sophisticated GPS device that was planted on her. And then he remembers seeing a guy bump into her at the motocross arena, and then uses his speed to systematically check everyone's face in Keystone, and he finds the guy doing this, and that's a really cool use of the Flash's powers. I think, in fact, I've been reading some more Flash like in between working on this episode, and there actually is an issue in the Mark Waid run where Wally West does this basically, and it's a really cool idea. It would look really cool on film. And he finds the guy, a criminal named Clive Yorkin, who tries to shoot him when confronted, only for Wally to catch the bullet out of the air, which is badass. And Yorkin flees, stealing a Ferrari at gunpoint, and Wally pursues, catching the attention of a local TV news helicopter, and he catches up to the Ferrari, taking it apart as he runs around it, eventually making it crash. Once again, very cool visual use of the powers. And he goes to question Yorkin, but flees from the onlookers who gather around the site. Wally then goes back to the crime lab and uses his powers to charm Linda into eating ribs with him, where he's like trying to catch up with her and all this stuff. And so Wally starts to explain to Linda his theory that Iris was murdered with a bolt of lightning, but backs down when Hunter shows up. And it looks like they might be dating, and it's not really clear. They have this weird, they're in a relationship but not really thing going on. I'm not really sure how it's meant to come off. It's very strange. And we then go to, every time this first name comes up, I just cringe. Van Savage. Jesus, just call him Vandal. Who is in bed with Stark and watching the news report about a supposed reappearance of the Flash. He's notably freaked out about this and sends Stark to kill his head of security for not knowing about this in advance. And we also see him take out his contacts, revealing dark black eyes, and enter his meditation room where a glowing meteorite is present in a hole in the earthen floor. Now, we'll get to an explanation for that relatively soon. And so Wally visits Iron Heights prison, where a guard named Hector shows him several of the Flash's enemies locked up, namely Rainbow Raider, Heatwave, and Pied Piper, and those guys are going to come back. He then lets Wally meet with Yorkin in a visitation room. He tries to get Yorkin to reveal who he's working for, but the man refuses more than once, and so frustrated, Wally vibrates through the barrier and chokes the name out of him, and he says, oh, it was Van Savage who hired me. And then Hector sees him getting violent with Yorkin and has him thrown out of the prison. Now, as far as the rogues they set up go, I feel like they could have picked some better ones. Like, I mean, Heatwave and Pied Piper are fine, but I mean, really, Rainbow Raider, you put him in here over Captain Cold, or like the Top, or any of the other really classic Flash villains like Mirror Master, you put Rainbow Raider in here? Like, isn't that guy kind of a joke in the comics? I'm pretty sure he is. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Then Wally tells John about this new information, but elects not to tell Linda because he doesn't want her to think he's crazy. And we then go to Linda in the lab, where Hunter meets her, invites her to dinner at his place, as well as teases her about Wally obviously liking her, and this is where we get the idea that they're not really an item yet. And we then go back to Wally and John, with the former determined to go to Savage's house to break in and look for evidence, with John insisting on going along and helping. And so they head out to Savage's estate, which is entirely run on renewable energy, and Wally puts an earpiece on under the costume so he can communicate with John and uses his speed to evade Savage's guards. One, however, catches just a brief moment of Wally talking to John. Like, he can hear him speak just very briefly, and then he alerts Savage to an intruder. And so Wally, he knocks out or avoids the incoming guards, and he finds a heavy door and vibrates the lock off, and behind that he finds Savage's trophy room, which is filled with weapons and torture devices from throughout history. Savage confronts him in this room, initially thinking he's Barry, and then a fight ensues, and he actually says, "Oh, I thought I killed you, blah, blah, blah." A fight ensues with Savage dominating Wally and unmasking him, learning his identity before having him taken to the recycling center behind the house with the intent to throw him in the muncher, which is this thing which it creates bales of plastic and chops them up into smaller cubes. Where did this whole environmental theme with Vandal Savage come from? I don't think that's a Vandal Savage thing. Like him being the uber environmentalist terrorist guy. I don't think that's Vandal Savage's shtick. I'm pretty sure, like, being obsessed with the environment, isn't that Ra's al Ghul's thing in the comics? I mean, which at that point, if you're going to throw Vandal Savage into a Flash script, might as well throw Ra's al Ghul into it, even though he's primarily a Batman villain. And so Savage's men, they also find John and capture him, and then Wally focuses and he turns his body into a human electrical conduit, shorting out the Muncher. He climbs out and saves John from Savage's guards, who are there going to throw him in there as well. And so Wally goes to Linda and Hunter and tells them about the basement, and Savage's statement that he killed Barry Allen, only leaving out that Wally went as the Flash. Hunter agrees to look into it and leaves, and Wally then gives Linda Iris's file on Savage Energy, asking her to look into it. And we then go to Savage Energy, where Martin is telling Stark about the satellite they have, which is used to create lightning, and the discs are grounding rods for it. So it's basically, they designed it as like a weapons contract or something. And then Savage storms in and demands Martin scrap all testing until they launch, which is when he's told he has a visitor, and they don't explain what the launch actually is about yet. So Savage finds Hunter waiting for him in his office, and he questions him about his basement, and then Savage chokeslams him into the wall, yelling about how he ordered Hunter to strangle Wally after he killed Barry. But then the cop retorts by saying that he was kept out of the loop about Iris. Savage backs down and decides to tell Hunter the full story. Savage has been around since prehistoric times and was made highly intelligent and immortal by the meteorite he now keeps in his basement, and I believe that is his origin story in the comics. There's like a meteor like enlightened him and made him immortal, and that's why he's been able to live all this time. I believe that is his origin story. I think they retconned it so that like the meteor was Kryptonian in origin or something strange like that, but I don't know enough to go into that in any detail. And he says he's watched time and again as humanity has killed each other off and hurt the planet, and he goes on this long spiel about environmental damage and all this shit, and how nature is fighting back with changing weather patterns, but it needs help. And so now he's decided to cull the species using his new technology like the satellite, and he says a select few will be picked to survive the destruction, and he says that that's going to include Hunter. And so Savage then has Hunter arrange for the different rogues, Rainbow Raider, Heatwave, and Pied Piper, and later on they say there's a whole bunch more in there, so it's like, why did you pick these three? Released from prison to fight the Flash, and we see them leaving Iron Heights and getting into a limo. And okay, so I gotta talk about Hunter Zolomon in this script. We see him 3 times before this reveal that he's a bad guy happens. One, he has like a single line at the beginning. He shows up at the crime scene. Okay, it's 4 times. He shows up at the crime scene, he shows up at the dam, and then he's there in that scene. He's in a couple of scenes with Linda. He shows up a handful of times, doesn't really do much. We don't get any sense of who he is. So the reveal that he's a bad guy and he killed Barry Allen means absolutely nothing to us. There's nothing at all interesting about Hunter Zolomon in this script. He's just an asshole. Like, in the comic, he's a really interesting character because he starts as one of the good guys, and you get a version of that, like it's different in the Goyer script, but he has a very strong character there. And here, he's just an asshole, and they weirdly decided they didn't want to get rid of, like, having, like, a disabled character in the script, so they just passed that on to somebody else. And so there's no real character motivation here, he's just an asshole, and so that really sucks in this script, and Vandal Savage being called Van Savage and being a pissy environmentalist also kind of sucks. So the next day, there's this thing called the Green Rally that's being set up at the convention center. It's part of Savage's, like, shtick. It's like his PR thing. That's being set up at the convention center, and Wally is despairing over his defeat and wants to give up, and John keeps at him, telling him that Barry gave him that costume for a reason, and tells him to try using his time rewinding abilities to find out what the reason was. And he also keeps telling John, I don't want you to come with me because I don't want you to get hurt, blah, 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 and that sort of pays off later. And so Wally goes back to the Allen house, and he actually vibrates so fast that he goes back in time and meets Barry, who explains his own origin, how he got covered in chemicals and struck by lightning, and that gave him the Flash's powers, so from the comics. And he says that he was trying to recreate that chemical mix the night he was killed, and that, Wally must have gotten that stuff soaked into him, and then, the lightning the lightning strike, unlock the abilities and whatnot. And then he trains Wally in how to use his powers and how to get faster, and tells him they improve whenever he helps people. So it's like the power of heart from Captain Planet, which is just seriously lame. And he then sends Wally back to his own times, telling him that Savage doesn't do his own dirty work, which is essentially cluing him in that Hunter was the guy who caused the explosion. And once again, this is another thing which it's sort of similar to the climax of the Goyer script, where Wally gets absorbed into the Speed Force and he meets Barry, who's trapped in that single moment of time. But this whole idea that Barry is still alive out there and Wally is going to find some way to bring him back, you don't get that. Instead, you just get really easy time travel, and it just doesn't work for me as much. There's no emotional resonance to this here the way it's written, at least not to me. And we then go to Hunter, who is ready for a date with Linda, but she shows up looking to arrest him, having connected him to the release of the 3 prisoners, because he apparently signed his own name to the document that allowed them to get out. So Hunter Zolomon not only is an uninteresting character in this script, he's also an idiot. Wally shows up in costume as the Flash, and he tries to get Hunter to confess by dangling him off a building and even dropping and catching him. So, wow, nice way to indulge in torture, our hero. Which I guess that's inspired somewhat by the "where were the other drugs going" scene from Batman Begins. But then the police show up and he has to leave, and then Hunter gets taken into custody, and this is basically the last time we see him until the very end of the script. Like, holy shit. Wally shows up out of costume and he takes Linda to a fancy 4-star restaurant, and they begin discussing Linda's findings, mainly that the stolen energy Iris was tracking was getting sent to a seemingly empty area in the nearby Bison Valley, and that she suspected that the satellite was some kind of weapon. And Wally also tries to tell her that he's the Flash, but he keeps getting distracted by the escaped prisoners, whom he takes down fairly easily. Now, I don't know why they bother introducing classic Flash villains into this script, and they give them fuck all to do, and Wally just takes these guys down in like a minute flat. Like, Rainbow Raider I get, because the guy just shoots weird gases and paint at people. I get that, why making him into a joke. But Heatwave gets taken down in like a second, and Pied Piper gets taken down with a little bit more effort. But still, these guys are classic Flash characters, and they're just totally disrespected here and not treated as any kind of threat at all. I'm like, maybe it's a good thing they didn't use Captain Cold in this script, because he would have just gotten his ass knocked out in 5 seconds. And what makes it even worse is that Pied Piper is played up as being the most dangerous villain of them all, and when you get into the Wally West run of the comics, he reforms and becomes a good guy, and becomes a good ally and friend of Wally West. So it's like, we're treating him like he's some kind of psycho here, and that just doesn't feel right to me. Also, while he's running back and forth between fighting these guys and coming back to dinner, because he keeps saying he's going to the bathroom, and there's one point where Linda goes, "Wally, are you on coke?" And he goes, "No, speed." And I'm just going, ha 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 ha, that's not funny. And so after knocking out, the last of them, he finds that Linda left the restaurant, so he got impatient. And so he goes looking for her, and it's a kind of a cool way it's described as him running on top of the telephone cables. Strung between telephone lines, strung between the poles. That's a really cool idea. He's looking for her, and he finds her, and apparently Pied Piper is up again and is holding her hostage, and then Wally takes him down with a sonic boom that screws up his implants or whatever. So once again, he gets taken down in like 5 seconds flat. But then Linda disappears from sight, and so he figures Savage has her. And so at dawn, he heads to Savage Energy, where Savage emerges with Linda as his hostage, tossing her away and throwing Wally into a nearby fountain, which is full of mercury instead of water, and which makes it impossible for him to get traction. And then Savage tells him that he plans to wipe out humanity, and he leaves a bomb in the fountain saying it's the same as the one that killed Barry. And I'm just thinking, okay, what kind of bomb did you construct that's able to kill the Flash? The Flash is pretty hard to kill, but we don't get any explanation for that, just that it is. And so Savage leaves, and Linda helps Wally escape the fountain, and he throws the bomb up into the sky where it explodes harmlessly. And then Savage, seeing that Wally survived, is incensed and orders his people in the weather center to launch, all while his green rally gets underway in the convention center. This thing is just there so you can have a crowd scene or two. Seriously, it doesn't actually mean anything in the overall arc of the plot. And so Wally and Linda, they head out to Bison Valley, where they spot an oil derrick-like structure that they can't identify, and right as they finally admit their feelings to each other, the ground opens up, and hundreds of missiles carrying more of the weather satellites emerge, and the countdown begins for them to launch, the idea being that he's going to go global with these satellites. So that's what his evil plan is. And then Wally begins taking them down, and angry Savage orders Martin to use his tech to attack the city and distract the Flash, and he refuses, getting stabbed to death by Stark for his trouble. And I'm like, wow, another classic Flash villain, the Weather Wizard, gets fucking shanked before he can even do anything. Congratulations, this script just doesn't really seem to care about Flash lore in any sense at all. And that just really sucks to me, frankly. And so jets that are, working for Savage, they spray chemicals into the clouds over Keystone City, causing a massive hailstorm. And there's earthquakes and stuff going on as well. And meanwhile, Wally is still taking down rockets and nowhere near finished with that when a nearby silo opens out and shoots out 6 twisters that head for the city, which force him to run off and save the people. Now, this is actually a pretty good action scene where he's creating like counter twisters that take them down. And he's saving citizens and stuff, and it's all very exciting stuff. And he manages to disperse them, but he gets knocked out cold by the last one. Then Savage sends Stark to finish the job, who literally begins cutting through the crowd around Wally to get to him. And because of the earthquakes, he's watching the TV and he sees that the dam is cracking. And so he wants to go out and help, so he heads for his van, but gets hit by lightning and destroyed, and it forces him to crawl over to Wally's bike and hotwire it and ride off. And I'm like, isn't there a foot brake on the bike that you need to use in order to get the back end to stop? Isn't that how motorcycles work? If he's paralyzed, how is he able to ride the motorcycle? I mean, you don't just use your hands on that, I'm pretty sure. And so John drives by right as Stark is about to kill Wally and rams her with the bike and knocking her aside, which is pretty funny. I actually did like that moment. That was cool. And he gets Wally to wake up and tells him about the dam. Wally gets there right as the dam breaks and the water's flooding towards the city, yet he's really struggling to try and figure out a way to do it. And eventually he runs back and forth in front of the oncoming wave and he creates a wall of air, essentially, which allows him to divert the water. And it goes all the way to Bison Valley, destroying the remaining rockets before they can launch. And there's a moment where they try and fake you out and make you think that Wally's dead because Linda finds his ring, but then he shows up like 5 seconds later. They have the romantic moment where they kiss, and before he heads to the weather lab and confronts Savage. I hate the fucking fake out there because he's not going to die in his first movie. But, it is what it is. And so a fight ensues with Wally getting some good hits in before Savage takes the lead and starts winning, just beating the shit out of him. And Wally then finds some of those metal discs nearby and he launches one at Savage, which crashes into him at super speed. And he then uses the satellite controls to kill Savage with a lightning strike, and then has the technicians on hand self-destruct the satellite. So yeah, we got Hero Who Kills here. Man, if this had come out, everything else in the movie, I feel like no one would have really given a shit about, but the fact that he killed Vandal Savage with a bolt of lightning, people have been like, how can he do that? How can he be a hero? Blah, blah, blah. It would have been super controversial. And so we then go to Iron Heights sometime later, where the rogues have been re-imprisoned, and Hunter Zolomon, who's locked up on the same cell block, and he's laying in bed, and he has like this evil smile, and so, he's gonna become Zoom in the sequel. Too bad I don't care, because nothing that makes Hunter Zolomon interesting is in this script, so him becoming Zoom will make him just another bad guy. Then we see Wally, he takes Linda back to his apartment, and he very quickly cleans it up, and the TV news is on talking about how all this stuff has happened, and Governor Savage has disappeared, and no one really knows what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And so, they're having, a moment, and then there's the news report that interrupts them talking about a derailed train somewhere in Pennsylvania, and Wally takes off to save the day, and it ends. This script, it's not the most horrendous or offensive or stupid thing I've ever read for this show, but it's one of the most bland. I just can't bring up the energy to really care about this thing, and I feel like this is going to be one of the more boring segments of an episode I've done, because it's just like, who cares? It's all very thin. Now, granted, I appreciate the fact that it's not like super, super long of a script, but at the same time, it's just like, I'm struggling to just give a shit about this plot. Wally is either unlikable or bland. We don't really get enough time with Barry Allen. There's no emotional resonance of any of that stuff. Van Savage is a lame villain in this context. The actual Flash villains are all treated like shit or poorly written. Zolomon especially is just horribly wasted in this, as just the asshole cop who, he doesn't get crippled, he doesn't become Zoom. They're saving that shit for a sequel, and it's just like, no. You've done nothing with... Now, if you were to introduce Hunter Zolomon in the script to have him be the good guy all the way through, and then we see his arc play out over a couple of movies with his disenchantment and stuff like that, that could actually work. But the way it's done here, he's already a bad guy, so I don't give a shit. It's nothing that makes Hunter Zolomon is present in this script, and that's a real kick to the face, because Goyer, I love what Goyer did with him in his draft, and this just feels like a really watered down, genericified version of what Goyer was doing. Goyer's version just has its problems, but just works, and this just feels flat and bland. So yeah, I can't say that I am particularly a big fan of this draft. I think it's a massive wasted opportunity. Something that could have been good, but just sadly wasn't. Now, what happens with the development from here is that, Levy was involved up until October 2007 when he left and was replaced by David Dobkin. Now, when David Dobkin first got the job, David Dobkin's a director I've liked in some instances. I quite like Wedding Crashers, and I quite like Shanghai Nights. Shanghai Nights is really stupid, but I still have fun watching it. But he gets taken over because Levy left because he was committed to do Night at the Museum Battle of the Smithsonian, which, goddamn, that was a disappointing sequel. And when Dobkin came in at first, he was talking about how, oh yes, this is going to be a spin-off from the Justice League movie that we're doing, focusing on Wally West. Now, if you've read the Justice League Immortal script, you'd know why that would make sense, but that's an episode for a different time. But then a month later, there was a new writer hired named Craig Wright, whom I don't really know anything about. Let me look at his credits for a second. He's apparently mainly a playwright. And Firefox is taking forever to load, but he comes in, and then suddenly Dobkin says, oh, it's not connected to the Justice League movie. And he eventually left, and I don't see anything saying when he left. But eventually David Dobkin did leave. Okay, Craig Wright mainly worked in television. He worked on 6 Feet Under, Lost, and something called Brothers and Sisters. So maybe he was, maybe he's written some good stuff. I don't know. I'm not familiar with his repertoire. But yeah, so I can't say anything about him. I'd like to read that script. And then eventually in 2008, they got in a new writer named Dan Mazeau, who was apparently working off a treatment by Jeff Johns. And Dan Mazeau got the job based on the fact that he had written a Johnny Quest script for Warner Brothers, which the studio loved, and so they gave him the Flash job after they liked that script. And I've read that script, and it is really good. So I'll be very curious to read Dan Mazeau's version of the Flash, and he would later go on to work on. I know he worked on Wrath of the Titans, but I've not actually seen that. So, well, I have seen that, but it's been a long time, and I've not read the drafts of it, so I don't know what he contributed or what other writers did. And he also wrote something called Cowboy Ninja Viking, what is that? Did that even come out? Hold on, I gotta figure this out. What is this? It's based on a comic. Oh, it was set to come, apparently, there was a production, it got delayed. It was supposed to release last year, but then the production got delayed because of there was apparently issues with it. Okay, so that's a film which is listed as 2019 but never actually came out, so Wikipedia needs to update its shit. And apparently he's been attached to the Van Helsing reboot. So that's interesting. But yeah, Dan Mazeau's version, I'd really like to see that, but that was around 2008-ish. But eventually that fell apart and we don't know why, but different people came in. Now, that script was in development in around 2008, and then for a couple of years, nothing was really heard, nothing was really reported on until around about February of 2010, it started getting rolling again, and it was reported that Greg Berlanti was supposed to direct The Flash, and he had co-written the first draft of the Green Lantern movie, which was very well liked at Warner Brothers, and he was actually supposed to direct before they booted him off that in favor of Martin Campbell, and they brought in other people to rewrite that, and we know how that movie turned out. And I guess because he didn't get to do that, he got the opportunity to do The Flash instead, so he brought in his co-writers from Green Lantern. He brought in Michael Green and Mark Guggenheim to write it with him, and they apparently were hired to do the treatment in June of 2010. And then that leads to this draft that I'm going to talk about now, which is The Flash, story by Greg Berlanti and Michael Green and Mark Guggenheim, and screenplay by Michael Green and Mark Guggenheim. It's dated February 16th, 2011. Now, for those of you who don't know, these guys, they worked on Green Lantern, and then they moved on. They created the Arrowverse not long after this, which included a Flash TV show, which we'll see as we go on. They took a lot of the first season of that show from this script. They basically took that and changed some things and spread it out over 22 episodes of a season. And also, they've done some other stuff. I know Mark Guggenheim has written comics, and I've not heard much good about most of them. I've heard even his Blade comic, by the standards of Blade comics, which tend not to sell well anyways, that sold horribly and is supposed to not be very good. Whenever he was most in charge of Arrow or any of the other shows, they were at their worst, at least when I was watching it. Him and his favorite word, organic, which thankfully that never comes up in this script. And Michael Green, interestingly enough, was the guy who went on to, he helped with Alien Covenant, but he only has a story credit, so I won't give him too much crap for that. He wrote Murder on the Orient Express, the newer version, which I liked, and he helped write Blade Runner 2049, which to me is one of the best movies of that decade. So yeah, good writer, interesting group of talent. Now he's the one who wasn't involved in the Arrowverse. But anyway, getting into the script, like I said, it's dated February of 2011. And the basic plot of this one is that we have Barry Allen, who, after the death of his mother when he was a kid, because this is based on the stuff that happened post-Flash Rebirth in the comics, so stuff that was relatively new at the time this script was written, because that stuff only got, this whole backstory only got introduced in like 2008, 2009, 2010, something like that. And so, his mother was murdered as a kid, and his father went down for the crime, and he's since died in prison in this version, so now he's a crime lab technician, and he's going around in his free time trying to solve all these various cold cases, unsolved crimes, to try and help people like himself. And one day he's in his lab, he's working on an official case where he's tracking down what appears to be a serial killer who kills people by making them very cold, and believe me, I'll get into that plot point. He gets struck by this special kind of lightning that Central City is known for, called phase lightning, and that gives him the powers of the Flash, and he comes under the wing of Star Labs and this team of scientists which are helping him deal with his newfound powers, and they're being led by the wheelchair-bound founder of Star Labs, Dr. Eobard Thawne. You're starting to see the similarities to the TV show if you've watched it. And so it basically follows him learning to do this stuff, learning how to use his powers, and eventually having to track down this cold serial killer. And more stuff happens. We'll get to that as we go along. And so it opens with a brief glimpse of a 14-year-old Barry Allen running for his life. And then it jumps forward to an adult Barry at 28 narrating about speed and lightning. We get a scene where the Flash, moving so fast he can't be seen, patrols Central City, described as having given up and failed. And that's a weird thing in this script, that Central City is being described as like this town in like the middle of collapse. It has like this ridiculously high crime and murder rates, and it just sets this weird tone, and it's almost like they try to turn Central City into Gotham City, like the Gotham City of this universe, which is weird because they mention Gotham City later on, and it's something I don't quite get personally. And he saves a lot of people, and then so we finally see him, only he doesn't have a full costume yet, only these special boots, and so I just imagine Barry Allen running around in Napoleon Dynamite's moon boots the entire time, and he runs to intercept an explosion that rocks a condemned building, hearing a scream, but it turns out to be coming from speakers. We glimpse a face watching Barry, having set a trap for him before the floor collapses into the flames below, with Barry falling in. So we get this sort of intro scene here. As far as in media res intros go, it ends up being not the greatest, especially when you get more context for the scene. It's really not that interesting. So it jumps back 2 weeks before, and Barry, who's running late, meets with a woman whose son was killed in the bombing, and he offers to help reopen her case, but she balks at the idea of exhuming her son's body. Barry gets a call on his cell phone from his boss, who's Fred Kyer in this version again, reprimanding him for his activities and alerting him to a crime scene he needs to get to. His car won't start, though, making him arrive late again, and it becomes this running joke that he's always late for everything, which isn't funny or interesting, and they kind of overplay it. Barry and the other forensic scientists, some of whom get names but they're never that important, so I won't mention them, they examine a woman's body found floating in the river with some sort of unusual tissue degradation, and Barry uses his knowledge of the river's tides to determine that the case falls within their jurisdiction instead of Keystone City's, which is across the river. And I'm just thinking this whole time, do rivers actually have tides? I thought that was an ocean thing. And more so, I didn't think an enclosed body of water like a river could have tides, because I've read about how apparently the Black Sea doesn't have tidal activity the same way as another sea would because it's enclosed. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it just seems like I don't think a river would have tides. I don't think that's the right term for it, regardless of whether that piece of information I brought up is actually correct. So then Barry calls up his old friend, reporter Iris West, who he very clearly has a crush on, and apparently there's something more between them even than that, which comes up way too late in the script, but I'll get to that later. Offering her information on the case, but she's just lost her job thanks to the newspaper now being obsolete. They refuse to get in on that whole internet thing, I guess. And so they commiserate in a diner, and it's called Infantino's Diner after Carmine Infantino, the big DC guy back in the 50s. And Barry helps keep her spirits up. Iris reminds him that she has a party planned for this coming Saturday, and Barry promises he'll make it. And then she invites him to go to Brooms, which is another creator reference, and it's a bar, but he backs down saying he'll have to go to the lab. And so he's examining the woman's corpse at the lab, and Barry has a flashback about his mother, telling him to step back from his homework to get a different perspective on the problem. And in that scene, he's shown reading Flash comics about Jay Garrick. And I know that was a thing back in like the 50s when they first created Barry Allen, that the Jay Garrick Flash who was created earlier, he was a comic book character, and they eventually met each other. You know, they crossed dimensions or something like that. They crossed into the alternate universe. But the later stuff that I've read, Jay Garrick was just the Flash of World War II, and then the later Flashes were like a different generation of Flashes, and now Jay Garrick's like a really old guy. I don't know how that shakes out with all the rebooting DC has been doing, if that's still the case, or if they changed that, or they changed it and changed it back. I don't know how that goes in comics right now, but it's not the way Jay Garrick, as I know, was presented. And this leads to adult Barry leaving the lab and heading home buying ice cream because his mom asked him to go get ice cream. And then he glances over at a tower owned by Star Labs, which triggers another flashback, where Barry and his mother talk about how Dr. Thawne of Star Labs is having that tower constructed and how it will contain a particle accelerator. And there's also this scene where Barry's going like, is Dad home? I don't know if I want to go home. And you get the idea that his dad is kind of going through a rough patch. You get the idea he's a bit of a drinker, but he's not necessarily abusive because, you know, he's out of work and so times are tough like that. We get this over like quite a few different scenes in the script. It takes you way too long to learn anything about what actually happened, which is a complaint I have. And so we go back to the present, and Barry continues his investigation at his apartment, working hard and falling asleep at his desk. The next morning, he goes back to the police lab and he tacks the word cold on a corkboard under the suspects heading, and then he explains to Kyer that the woman died of extreme hypothermia, and he found 2 similar cases in his unsolved files, thinking that this might be a serial killer. And Kyer is like, Barry, don't go around telling people this. We don't need the publicity, blah, blah, blah. And so Barry, he needs access to a mass spectrometer to continue the investigation, but Kyer won't hear about it, reprimanding Barry for spending so much time on unsolved cases, saying that solving them won't bring her back. So this is where we start building Barry's motivation in this, which is actually kind of decent. And I like the idea of him going around trying to solve other cases because, you know, his own case couldn't be solved properly and he feels like the wrong guy went down for it. That's a really good. It's not bad, considering we're working in this relatively new comic material here. And so Barry goes home again, and he examines his oldest unsolved file, and it's here that we learn that his mother was murdered when he was a kid, and his father took the rap for it. And there's this whole running, there's another thing that kind of gets brought up here a little bit, but gets explicated more later down the line, where there was a fingerprint on the murder weapon, and it didn't match his dad, and it's like, then why did he go to prison if the fingerprints didn't match? I mean, that seems like a pretty open and shut case right there. Or maybe there's some nuance I'm not getting. And he sees a debate about the accelerator on TV, and it gives him the idea to try to use a spectrometer at Star Labs. So Barry heads over there, making his way past a crowd of protesters, and we learn that the accelerator, the brainchild of Dr. Eobard Thawne, the founder of STARS, is due to be switched on soon, and people are like worrying about what could happen if it gets switched on. You know, could it cause could it like destroy the universe or something? So like the same kind of hyperbolic stuff people are saying about the Large Hadron Collider when that was about to get turned on. So you can see they're kind of drawing from real life in here a little bit. And so Barry gets refused access to the spectrometer, but he goes and sneaks up to that lab anyways, only to get caught by Dr. Valerie Perez, who kicks him out. And he has a brief speech about how like this city has this astonishingly high murder rate and no one seems to want to do anything to help, but it seems to affect her. And so yeah, at this point, I think they say it has like one of the highest, Central City has one of the highest murder rates in the country. And I'm like, once again, why are we making this into the Gotham City of the Midwest? It's so strange to me because I don't think Central City has ever been that in any version of the Flash. I don't ever think that was a thing. And so Barry goes home and realizes it's time for Iris's party, and he heads out, only for his car to not start, causing him to be late again. He arrives at the restaurant that the party is being held at, only to discover that it's an engagement party, as Iris is marrying a guy named Nathan Newberry. And he is so totally surprised about this. And I'm like, if you two have been close friends all this time, how do you not know she's been seeing someone to the point where she's getting engaged? Unless she got engaged to him like fucking immediately after she met him. How are you not even aware of this? It's so weird that she wouldn't say anything. And so Barry gets hassled briefly by a 10-year-old Wally West who's going, Barry, you shouldn't be staring at another man's girl, that's impolite. And so he gets told to leave by his mother. And so Wally's mother, who is Iris's sister, and that doesn't make any sense because why would Wally's last name be West when Shouldn't it be her brother be Wally's father? That's what it is in the comics, but they clearly weren't thinking about this. And she talks to Barry about how, oh, you came to live with us all those years ago, and we always thought it would be you two getting together, but then he never did anything about their interest in each other, and she eventually moved on, and there's going to be some conflicting information about that later, but we'll get to it once again. And so Barry, he bails out of the party early and returns to the crime lab, and that party is the last time we see Iris for a little while, where he finds a letter from Valerie giving him the temperature information he needed, and then he proceeds to digitally reconstruct the dead woman's face. It's during this process that the window gets knocked open. There's a bit where it's like it gets knocked open, but he doesn't get struck by lightning. Ba-ba-ba-bum. They try to fake you out with it, but he gets struck by lightning anyways, and he experiences visions of the past, present, and future, including talking to people he hasn't met yet, like Thawne, as well as glimpses of a world where his mother lived on, and eventually settles into a flashback to the night his mother died, where Barry is whisked away into a field and ran back home when he heard his mother scream, and he gets home to find his mother stabbed to death and his father standing over the body in shock. And we also see young Barry insisting to a younger Goyer that his father didn't do it. So Barry gets taken to the hospital where Goyer and Iris watch over him, so she got back a little sooner than I thought. They watch over him as the doctors try to help him, but he keeps seizing. And then the wheelchair-bound Eobard Thawne arrives on the scene via helicopter and assists, eventually getting Barry to slow down. He has Barry remove the Star Lab so he can be examined thoroughly. And there's a brief scene of Iris expressing her concerns about this to Nathan, and we learn here that his firm is deeply involved with Star Labs, setting up stuff for later. We then go to the labs where Barry is undergoing procedures to help him get his new condition under control, all under the watchful eye of Thawne. And actually, I think that might be the last appearance of Iris for at least 20 or so pages. Like, she's important, but not that important. So Thawne tells Barry he thinks that Central City's famous phase lightning, and it's this kind of lightning that like moves between clouds. It's very weird the way it's described, and they say, oh, it's like this, it draws lots of tourists to Central City. And I'm like, if they have a thriving tourist industry over this lightning, why are they in such bad shape? I don't know. But a bolt of which is what struck Barry. It contains what he calls a Kanigher particle, which is a reference to another DC creator. Who is it? Bob Kanigher? I know he was like the guy who was like the big Sergeant Rock writer. I know that. And he could prove to be the key to manipulate space-time, which is why he chose the city for his accelerator. He theorizes that Barry is now swimming with them, and that's what gives him his abilities, and he can like draw them off and stuff like that. He's doing that for research he wants to do that for research purposes. Testing at the lab begins, the team consisting of biophysicist Murray Takamoto, physicist Jerry McGee, and Valerie, who is none too pleased to see Barry. They start by putting Barry on a treadmill to test his speed, but he starts running uncontrollably and destroys it. So this is where we start getting some more parallels with the first season of the TV show. Thawne is Harrison Wells. Murray Takamoto is basically Cisco, and Valerie is Caitlin Snow, essentially. And the whole thing about the phase lightning, they kind of played around with that, and there's a whole particles accelerator exploding thing. That's not in here, but adding like this more science-y sort of explanation to the lightning is kind of similar to what that show ended up doing. So yeah, so you can see where they picked some things out of here and stuck it in there. Also, Iris dating and being engaged to someone else, that's another thing that was in the show as well. And so we go back to the CSI lab, and Goyer goes over Barry's computer, finding the complete reconstruction of the dead woman's face. He runs her through the Jane Doe files, narrowed down by a dry cleaner label that was on her corpse. And she comes up, and Goyer announces to the press that they're now dealing with a serial killer. And then we see a man with a sandwich, who is actually called Man with Sandwich in the script. His face out of sight in the shadows, watching the press conference on TV. He goes to his basement and puts on a pair of goggles and walks over to a freezing man he's holding captive. And we're told that these are the prisoner's last moments alive, and so now he's called Goggles because he put goggles on. I'm going to save you a whole lot of time and say this is supposed to be Captain Cold, and I don't like what they do with Captain Cold in this script at all. I feel like they completely miss his character here. Make him into a serial killer, kind of, compared to there's more to it than that, as we find out later on, but he's essentially a movie serial killer in a lot of ways, in the way he's presented. And if you read interviews, I forget if it was with Berlanti or Guggenheim, it was one of those two guys. They were talking about when they went to write this, they said it was going to be darker than their Green Lantern script because, Barry Allen is a crime lab guy, and that's kind of a darker world. And so we want to bring in some of that CSI influence into this. And it almost kind of feels like they were pandering to what they thought Warner Brothers wanted by trying to put some darker elements in here. And maybe and Berlanti was thinking, maybe I won't get fired off this one like I did off of Green Lantern. So So maybe if we pander to what they liked about The Dark Knight, in a sense, and boy, howdy, will we get to some of that later on. Maybe, I can, pitch them on my idea and keeping me on board a little more, because this isn't what they do with Captain Cold at all in the TV show. I'll just leave it at that for now. Goyer visits Barry at Star Labs, and Barry is concerned over Goyer publicly alerting the killer like that. And Goyer shares concerns of his own and warns Barry to be cautious about Thawne's motives, and Barry is. Here, unlike in the TV show with Harrison Wells, where Barry doesn't seem to suspect anything until the season's almost over. Here, Barry is kind of, thinking about things a little bit more, which I like. And then, so Barry and the team then head out to some salt flats where Barry is set up to race McGee, who's behind the wheel of a race car. Barry manages to easily outrace him, but he nearly runs into a canyon before getting his speed up to 300 miles per hour and jumping over it. And back at the lab, we see that his clothes have burned off and his feet are bloody, and McGee starts to come up with a specially designed outfit to reduce the damage caused by friction. And that's a weird thing the script does as well, where Barry will constantly get fucked up by his speed. It almost goes into like this weird body horror territory, which is tonally out of step with this script, even with all the serial killer stuff in it. I don't really get it. Especially since it's canonical in the comics that the Flash has a protective aura that keeps this shit from happening to him, so... Yeah, it doesn't bother me at all in the Goyer script, though, for some reason, but that's just a much better script than this. And so Thawne enters the room and challenges the team to broaden their focus beyond making Barry run faster, even though he wants Barry to run faster. He'll just say things like this. And so McGee gets the idea to experiment with deceleration, and the experiments continue. They try throwing a football and shooting a gun at Barry, but he manages to catch the ball and bullet out of the air. And so they see a news report about a tornado in the next state, and Barry gets this idea to go try a speed against it, and they drive over there. And once again, in the Flash pilot, the big climax of it is him stopping a tornado, so we're seeing some of that stuff here. At first, Barry is overwhelmed by the challenge, but the sight of a family trapped in the car in the path of the storm galvanizes Barry, and he runs around the tornado counter to its rotation, which dissipates the weather pattern. But he stops a bit too quickly, though, and he flies through the air and breaks both of his arms. So yeah, more weird body horror stuff. And we then go to Goyer, who is briefing a team of detectives on the search patterns he wants them to use to find the killer, when he gets a call from another crime lab scientist who's working at a crime scene where the man from the basement has been found dead. Goyer gets in his car but begins to freeze over, and a silver disc emits a fog that makes him pass out. He then awakes, tied to a chair, facing the killer himself, now identified in the scene descriptions as Leonard Snart, so that's Captain Cold's name. And he then goes on a motive rant about how people never slow down and appreciate their lives, and that Cold slows everything down. He then says that he is coming and will bring the cold end. We then find out that he's broadcasting this live on a big TV in Central Square, and then Snart injects Goyer with a syringe filled with a blue chemical, which freezes him to death from the inside out. Snart then makes a threat, telling the people of the Twin Cities that he'll destroy one of their landmarks, and that the only way for them to avoid it is to stay home with their families. So yeah, him killing someone, broadcasting it live, making these demands, setting up terrorist actions essentially. Are you starting to see the Dark Knight influence a little more? Because to me, this is just them trying to do Heath Ledger Joker, and it gets almost to the point of parody as this thing goes on. Captain Cold is not Heath Ledger Joker at all. There are characters you could do that with for sure. But Captain Cold is like, he's almost kind of like an anti-villain in a lot of ways, because he's a very, human, almost kind of sympathetic character. He almost has some heroic qualities to him in the comics as well. Like he has this, it's almost like he views the Flash as like this, like really worthy opponent in a lot of ways, and he's very much a working man kind of hero, and like they basically form a villain union with him as the head, so making him into this terrorist come serial killer come a few other things as we go along, that just doesn't really sit well with me. Now his weapon is different here, where he's shooting this cold freezing chemical out of it. Now his gun in the comic and in the TV show, as we see, it doesn't freeze you, it slows down the motion of your molecules, so basically what freezing does to you, but without the ice. So yeah, that's essentially how his weapon is supposed to work, and I don't mind them changing that, but the characterization is kind of shit. Iris is at Nathan's office compiling her resume, so yeah, we're finally back to Iris after like 20 pages away from her. When she sees the report on Goyer's death on the TV, she then calls Barry, whose arms have already healed, and tells him. Barry and Iris, they attend the funeral, and he then returns to Star Labs. It's mentioned that he's still in his dress blues at this point, but saying he has to go back to work, and then Thawne pulls him aside saying he wants to show him something. And as they walk, a conversation ensues where it becomes clear that Thawne knows all about Barry's mother and how his father died in prison. And we also learned that Thawne contracted multiple sclerosis, presumably what landed him in the wheelchair. He takes Barry to a containment room that holds artifacts recovered from phase lightning storms, which appear to have originated in different time periods, as well as different timelines entirely. And there's these two weird pieces of metal he shows to Barry, which are important later. Thawne then explains his theory that the storms are where the barrier between this world and others is at its thinnest, and that he designed the accelerator to shoot a single particle into one of those worlds, only now he wants to send Barry, telling him that there could be a world out there where his mother is still alive. And then the next day, the cities are in chaos with people cramming into cars and onto trains at Central Station trying to get out of town. Barry, who runs to work using his super speed, meets Iris in the entry hall of the police station, where she tells him that she's now a blogger and is writing about the killer, whom she has taken to calling cold. So yeah, Iris becoming a blogger, that's a thing from the TV show as well. They talk in his lab, and we learn here that Snart has apparently managed to keep the footage from his display from being saved anywhere. How the fuck he managed that, I have no idea. It's then that Snart, disappointed so many didn't heed his warnings, attacks Central Station using ampules of chemicals to freeze the walls and floors with black ice, and shooting anyone who tries to run with syringes full of the blue stuff fired from a special gun he carries. Barry hears the emergency call and runs over to the station, where the black ice has reached the windows and made them shatter out over the crowd. Unable to move all the glass, Barry instead moves all of the people out of the way, remaining unseen as he does so. So this is a pretty good use of the Flash's powers. I do like this. He then spots Snart driving down the ramp towards the trains in his truck and pursues, and he manages to catch Snart, but he's already managed to toss one of his ampules onto the tracks in front of an oncoming train. So Barry is forced to let Snart go and saves everybody from the train, taking some shrapnel to his back as he gets the last passenger out. So once again, more of him getting damaged. Barry then runs to Valerie's place and gets her to pull out the piece of metal. He leaves and returns super quickly with some flowers, then quickly replaces them with chocolates when she says she's allergic. Barry then has to eat those chocolates because he's pushed himself too far. He's getting dizzy before leaving again, with Valerie being thoroughly charmed. Then at the scene of the crash, Iris interviews the last passenger saved and checks the security footage, spotting a blur that appears to be shaped like a foot. And so we're starting the thread from the TV show where Iris is blogging about she's one of the first people to figure out that the Flash is a thing and starts blogging about him. So that's another thing they recycled. And so Barry meets with Thawne at Star Labs, where a running track is being installed inside the accelerator loop. And Thawne talks about Barry will have to hit the speed of light in order to break through the barrier, and McGee arrives with the boots we saw in the opening, which are now ready for Barry to use. So yeah, we're pretty far into this thing, and there's still no costume, which is interesting. Barry then goes to Iris's weekly dinner party at the apartment she shares with Nathan, and then Iris starts to explain her theory about the super fast man running around saving people, but Barry defuses this by running the math and demonstrating how moving that fast would be impossible, and he's doing it in kind of like a smug way too, which is kind of funny. And after everyone leaves, Nathan questions why Iris still puts up with Barry, wondering if she's still interested in him, so we get some of the romantic entanglements that the show also did, but not as well as that show did it, to be honest. So Barry then checks the fingerprint records, looking for one that matches his mother's killer's print, but finds nothing. And he gripes about this while talking with McGee, who suggests he should go make things right for someone else. And so this takes us back to the opening, with Barry running around the city helping people and getting caught in that explosion. But it turns out it was all set up by the Star Labs team, minus Thawne, who doesn't know about it, who want to help Barry out in his endeavors. They agree to keep it secret from Thawne, who wants Barry focused on the accelerator, and begin designing an outfit that complements his abilities. So we're around page 70. Yeah, that whole in media res opening, it's leaving you wondering, oh, what's going to happen? And it was nothing. It was total bullshit from a bunch of team members who might as well be faceless and nameless, because let's be honest, Takamoto doesn't get anywhere near the characterization Cisco got in the show. McGee is just the kind of smug guy, and Valerie is the chick, who also doesn't get nearly as much as Caitlin got in the show. So something that the show did better. So we get a montage of Barry saving people and the costume getting put together, with narration of Iris posting about the Flash on her blog, and we see her visit the diner again, and Snart is there, and seems like he might be following her, and he's really there just so the waitress can ask him if he wants it hot or cold, and he just smiles at her because we had to put a cold pun in there. Barry also keeps working on the accelerator, moving fast enough to get visions again, but not fast enough for Thawne's purposes. So the whole idea of Barry needing to get faster as part of the plot is something they recycled in the show in both seasons, because Barry is never ever fast enough for anything in that show, and it's kind of annoying if I'm being honest. So after he gets done, Valerie asks him out for a drink, and we then go to Iris and Nathan's apartment where she's discovered that one of Cold's victims had recently bought stock in a company brokered by Nathan's firm, and it was an anonymous tip. And he agrees to look into it for her, and they leave for dinner. They arrive at the same bar that Barry, Valerie, and the team are at, and Barry and Iris have a bit of a spat about her provoking Cold, and she mentions her lead to him, and then Valerie and Iris, they start acting jealous and catty, and it's kind of like, stop it. So Barry and Valerie, they go back to his apartment where he explains that this is where the whole Iris thing gets really weird, because he says that they were apparently together as teenagers. He says, we lost our virginities at 17, blah, 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 but they apparently fell apart because of his obsession with his mother's case. You know, that kind of drove a wedge between them. That doesn't feel at all like what we were setting up earlier on with their past. Like, it seemed like Barry never did anything with her. It didn't seem like there was ever even a thought of there being a relationship there, but it seems like there was now. It feels like they changed their minds after they got over halfway through this thing. Also, it takes until about page 75 for Barry to get his costume in this. That is about as long as it takes Reb Brown's Captain America to get his costume. Think about that. Okay, and so, yeah, they apparently then, Barry and Valerie then apparently spend the night together, so she's fast. And the next morning, he meets with Iris at the station, telling her he looked into her lead, and he found that Cold's victims had all spent a good deal of money 6 months before they died. And from this, Barry deduces that Cold isn't in fact a serial killer, but a hitman. So, yeah, another plot twist. And so while this conversation is going on, we see Snart sneak up behind Nathan while he's in the shower, and that's when Barry gets alerted to a new frozen crime scene with the victim missing, and it's Nathan's apartment. And so they're talking about how, he went after Nathan to get to Iris, blah, blah, blah. He rushes over to the scene, finding one of Snart's devices that didn't explode, and takes it to Snar Labs to be analyzed. And Thawne enters the room in the middle of this, saying that he's known what they were up to all along, and helps them. And they notice that it has like shielding for a kind of radiation that was used to compress the chemicals, and it leaves a signal of some sorts that Barry can detect. So he runs off to look for it, and he's running around checking potential buildings, and Snart has Nathan tied up and prepared to inject him. And right at the nick of time, Barry locates Snart's house and stops him, handcuffing him to a pipe. He gets the team to tell him what an effective treatment would be, and he rushes Nathan to the hospital, leaving a note explaining it. He then returns to Snart's house to find the handcuffs frozen and shattered, and goes in pursuit of Snart, catching up to him on a local bridge. Iris and the cops, they arrive on the scene just as Barry gets there and takes Snart's car apart and makes a makeshift cage of it. So kind of similar to that scene from the Brancato Draft. And he makes himself fully visible to Iris for just a moment. It's basically unavoidable at this point. And also, this is where I should mention that Iris, throughout her blog posts about the Flash name hasn't come up yet. She calls him the Silent Guardian. So once again, blatant cribbing from the Dark Knight. Only here they call the Flash the Silent Guardian about 17 fucking times throughout the second half of this script. Jesus. And we go to the police station where we get yet another Dark Knight ripoff where a lab tech tells Barry how Snart has no idea and has frozen his fingers solid so there are no prints. And he has nothing in his pockets but knives and lint. It doesn't actually say that last part, but it might as well. So he went to all this trouble to hide his identity, but then he told them their name anyways, Leonard Snart. So you're ripping off that sequence from the Dark Knight without even understanding why it works. And he used to be a workaholic in a lab, but he came home late one night to find his family had died in the fire and went nuts, getting committed before escaping eventually in the middle of a snowstorm. And Snart only gave them his name because he's confident that a mysterious protector will save him, and he gets shipped off to Iron Heights prison. So yeah, we're getting into heavy Dark Knight territory here. And you can already guess, Snart's going to make his escape. And so Iris visits Nathan in the hospital, who shows her the note that the Flash left behind. And then back at Star, Thawne comments on the design of Cold's machine and asks McGee about the coolants for the accelerator his team worked on. And McGee gives a cagey answer, but Thawne remembers it was a design they discarded because they couldn't get it to work properly. And he then has Valerie look into inquiries into their spec designs, both internal and external. Valerie also questions McGee about a particle containment device that's gone missing. It's the device that's supposed to, contain the Kanigher particles that Barry gives off when he runs on the accelerator. It's gone missing, and he gets defensive again. And so this idea of Captain Cold's gun being based off of stolen Star Labs technology, that is in the TV show as well, only there the gun was created as sort of a fail-safe in case Barry went evil. It was meant to be used against him just in case something went wrong. So that's something that's also similar here. Thawne talks to Barry privately in his office, encouraging Barry to give up on the failed city and help him punch through to a better world, and Barry tells him he can't let the case go as he knows there must have been someone behind Cold. He then combs through financial records with super speed and is then met by Iris at his apartment. Barry tells her that all of the victims did work for subcontractors with ties to Star Labs, but she has bigger revelations. Having compared to the note from Nathan to a book Barry had inscribed for her as a birthday gift, it was so corny-ass shit, I forget. It was Slaughterhouse 5, and he says, Iris, you're the only person I don't feel unstuck in time with. I'm like, wow, Barry. So Iris has figured out that he's the Silent Guardian. And he doesn't deny it, but there seems to be a romantic spark between them, but Barry encourages her to just go back to Nathan. And he also tells her to call him The Flash. So that's where the name comes from. He stole it from the comic. And so Barry runs over to Iron Heights and he vibrates into Snart's cell to question him about whom he's working for. Snart instead lectures him in his philosophy about slowing down, so he's just a really douchey minimalist. Before something else breaks into the prison, killing guards and knocking Barry down. It's like moving so fast, it's like slicing them open. Like that's basically what it's doing. When he gets back up, he sees Snart making his escape along with a few other cons, but he also sees another speedster in a suit like his, only black. Fucking again, really? I hate that. Running in the opposite direction and pausing to look back as if to beckon Barry to follow, which he does. Barry pursues and fights the Dark Speedster, because we can't call him Reverse Flash, can we? Also, there actually is a character called the Black Flash, who is a villain who wears a Black Flash costume. I haven't read that stuff, I've only seen the picture of it. But that's a completely different character. We don't need... Reverse Flash is fine being yellow. Fuck off with the black suit shit, sorry. But he pursues and fights this dark speedster all over America, including in Smallville, Gotham, and Metropolis, so Gotham still exists, so... Central City is worse than Gotham in this universe? Very strange. And they eventually end up at a beach in Normandy where the Dark Speedster delivers a vicious beatdown to Barry, effectively immobilizing him. Barry recognizes him as the one who killed his mother all those years ago, and the Dark Speedster, voice buzzing, says he did because he always hated Barry and wanted to take everything from him. And so far, he's only spared Iris because he wants to use her as insurance, saying he'll kill her if Barry keeps running. He then disappears, leaving Barry broken and bloody on the beach. That whole thing about don't keep running, Barry, that's going to make no sense in a second. So Iris is visiting, Barry returns to Star Labs, defeated and broken, saying he's given up the hero act for good. McGee and Takamoto, they leave in frustration, and Valerie asks him why. And when he says it's because Iris could be killed, she realizes that he still loves her and breaks up with him there and then. So that relationship part of the script was so meaningful. They had one date and fucked, and now she's already broken up with him. Completely pointless. And yes, that was sort of a thing. That's something that's a bit different from in the TV show, because in the TV show, he does go out with Caitlin once, and they go to like a karaoke bar, I think, but it's not like, they're not dating or anything. Like, it's something that they sort of carried over, but didn't. And so Thawne then shows up and encourages Barry to run on the accelerator, and he very nearly hits light speed, with Thawne saying he'll be ready for sure the next time around. And then Iris is visiting Nathan in the hospital when he tells her that he was Snart's target, not her. He laundered money for Star Labs to pay people to make secret changes to the accelerator, and these are the same people that Snart has killed. Nathan was the only one with the master list of names, hence why he was supposed to be killed as well. Iris goes to Barry with this information, telling him that the accelerator must have been altered to do something it wasn't supposed to do, and someone wanted it covered up. And this is intercut with Valerie examining Snart's weapon again, getting an idea, leading her going down to the accelerator to check something out. Now, that's the last time you see Nathan in this script. But once again, that relationship, completely pointless because it just falls apart anyways. And he's just kind of a generic asshole, or at least they tried to play him like that. And I feel like he kind of doesn't deserve this reaction. Like, he does come clean with her, he is honest with her, and then she just goes like, nope, fuck you, and leaves. Her fiance character, Eddie, in the show, not only was he a good red herring character for the Reverse Flash, but he was also a really cool character in his own right. He was this really, really cool guy, really, and his sacrifice he ends up making in the finale of the season was really moving. This guy, nope, nothing. So Valerie goes to Thawne, explaining what she found. The radiation shielding in the containment units used to store Barry's Kanigher particles is the same as that on Cold's weapon. She thinks that someone in league with Cold modified the accelerator, and if it reaches full power, it could cause a universe-destroying singularity. Valerie names McGee as her suspect, but that's when Thawne stands up and leaves the wheelchair, vibrating quickly, revealing himself as the Dark Speedster. He says he siphoned off Barry's speed because he wants to go home, before slashing Valerie open with super quick vibrating hands. And this is also ends up being the main thrust of the TV show, because it turns out that Harrison Wells is in fact Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash, and that he's stranded in this era and he wants to go back to his home in the future. Only here it's I think here it's supposed to be he's in another alternate world that he wants to go back to, but in that it was a time travel thing. So yeah, that's the big thing they carried over from this script to the TV show, is what they do with the Reverse Flash, more or less. And he slashes Valerie open with super quick vibrating hands. So, ugh. Iris encourages Barry to keep going as the Flash and investigate what's been happening at Star Labs. That's when Barry gets a call and he heads over there where Valerie has been found dead and McGee has been arrested for the crime. How the hell would he have done that? No one seems to think about that here. And so Barry intuitively knows that McGee is innocent and realizes that Thawne is behind everything, so he's pretty smart here. When an explosion rocks Central City, Sakamoto hands Barry his costume and he runs into action. And oh, by the way, he cares about Valerie being dead for less than a page. She doesn't even get mentioned after this, I don't think. The cons that escaped with Cold are terrorizing the city, and they've specifically been set up to keep Barry busy while Thawne is setting up his final plan. And Barry takes most of them out. He then interrogates a bomber, learning the locations of 6 bombs hidden throughout the city. And this gives him the push to finally let go of his inhibitions and hit light speed, getting all of the bombs taken care of in time. And that's actually a pretty cool, well-written sequence. And while this is going on, we see Iris get taken by Snart, as well as Thawne standing before his costume, and he puts those 2 future artifacts together to form a steel lightning bolt insignia. So that's one of those things where it's like, I don't know why they needed to do that, and also, it reminds me of the J.J. Abrams Superman drafts, where there's like these 5 objects that Clark is playing around with, and he puts them together, and a negative space forms the Superman logo. Why? Like, they had to have read that script, right? Where else would they have come up with this? It's one of the weirder ideas in that script, too. Which is saying something, because that script is full of bizarre ideas. And so Barry returns to Star, where he meets Thawne in full costume, and he tells Barry that he just wants to go home and that it was Barry who trapped him here. Thawne came from another universe where he got his powers by stealing Barry's speed, and we don't really get any backstory and motivation for why he hates the Flash, he just does. And that's interesting because in the comics for years there was no motivation. He just hated Barry for no reason. He would just show up and be a dick because he could. And it wasn't until the Wally West era of the comics where they actually explained that. So kind of clever, I guess, that they do that here. And so during a fight between the two, Barry ripped into the Speed Force, which is this thing that Thawne earlier says it exists beyond the speed of light, blah, blah, blah. And so carrying Thawne in his wake, and he ended up in this universe where he was unable to steal Barry's power because he was still a young kid. He built the accelerator as a way to get home and waited for Barry to gain his power so he could follow them into the accelerator and head home. He also broke Snart out of the mental hospital to help cover his tracks. So Barry pleads with him, saying that the resulting black hole would destroy the universe, but that's a sacrifice Thawne is willing to make. And Thawne then reveals that Snart is standing in the accelerator with one of his needles to Iris's neck, threatening to kill her if Barry doesn't play ball and let him do. It's unclear here because he spends all this time going, Barry, you need to run on this thing, and then Thawne just runs on it himself. It's honestly kind of strange here, like the ultimatum he gives. And also, the whole thing where he shows up as the Dark Speedster, beats the shit out of Barry, and says, don't run, and then in his wheelchair persona, he just goes, I want you to run on the accelerator, Barry, do it! I'm sorry if you heard that thunder right there, that was loud. But it's just weird that he would go, stop running, Barry, keep running, Barry, stop running, Barry, keep running, Barry. And so Barry lets Thawne run the accelerator, going after Iris. He knocks her aside just as Snart fires, backhanding the shot back at him, killing him. So yeah, you killed off Captain Cold, no bringing him back, because he's actually a great character and he got completely fucked over in this script. Thawne's crossover into the Speed Force has caused the black hole they were afraid of, so Barry helps Iris hide in a shielded niche, confessing his love and saying goodbye. He then runs around in the circle fast enough to unwind the black hole and enters the Speed Force, where he fights Thawne. Now able to move faster than him, Barry dodges an attack which sends Thawne flying deeper into the Speed Force, where he is torn apart and consumed. And so Barry gets caught in the Speed Force's wake, and this scene is honestly fantastic here. I love this part. And everything goes white before he finds himself in the kitchen. His mother is there, alive and much older, and he finally gets to see her again. He looks out the window, seeing himself and Iris playing with their children, and his father, alive and happy, looking on. So he gets this happy moment, and then he's talking to his mother, and he gets to say, he gets to talk to her one last time, and then he fades back into white. Seemingly consumed by the Speed Force, but he hears Iris's force calling out to him, which leads him back to his own world. And so Barry comes to in the accelerator, and he and Iris finally kiss right there. We then get a montage of the Flash saving people and helping to rebuild around the city, and Iris is still using that fucking Silent Guardian bullshit in her posts. And we also see that Thawne's fingerprints match the one on his mother's murder weapon, which clears his father's name. And then 2 different narrations play over this, Iris reading out one of her blog articles and Barry talking about his speed. And then it ends with a crash of light. But no, we didn't get a post-credit scene because this was written when those were starting to come into vogue in like full force. And Barry skids to a stop and comes face to face with Hal Jordan, aka Green Lantern, who compliments him on hitting light speed, and then it ends for real. So this is very clearly trying to set up a shared universe with the Green Lantern movie. And you can tell watching that Green Lantern movie that Warner Brothers really wanted that to be their Iron Man, because A, it's a character the general public doesn't know that well, which Iron Man was, and they start seeing the universe in that movie. Amanda Waller is essentially Nick Fury in that. So yeah, this is trying to be another part of this. This is trying to be the second part of that shared universe, essentially. Whether Warner Brothers would have gone for it at that point, who knows? They could have easily changed their minds. So yeah, this script, on the whole, it's okay. I'm not as thoroughly bored by it as I am by the Brancato Draft. I'm not as befuddled by it. But the thing with this is that it's got a lot of problems. I feel like it takes way too long to get going. The different sides of the plot don't all mesh well, particularly like the whole Cold thing being tied into Thawne is just, I don't feel like that quite works as well as it should. Captain Cold is terrible, and the relationship stuff, not great. But I do like the way they do Thawne in this. I think it's interesting. The thing is that everything this script does well, the first season of the TV show did better, and everything it does badly, it either did better in the case of the relationships, or didn't do it all, like the Captain Cold bullshit in this, where they actually made Captain Cold in the TV show, instead of some shitty crossover between Heath Ledger's Joker and Kevin Spacey from Seven, with a douchey minimalist perspective. I mean, and also, it doesn't help that the circumstances under which I read this, it took me forever to get this read because I was sick for a while. And then, I just couldn't find the energy to read this thing for a little while there. It just dragged for me. So maybe my experience this time was colored by circumstances and the fact that I was also working on some other stuff related to the show in the background. So it's just like, it just did not hit me the way it should. I'd still say it's better than the Brancato script. Is it better than the Jim Strain script? That is a question, because I don't particularly like the Strain script, but it's very much its own thing, whereas this is fucking around with Flash lore and not in a good way, so I can't tell between those two, but the Goyer Draft stands tall above all the rest. So yeah, that was the Michael Green and Mark Guggenheim draft. Now, we're not quite done here. There's no real official word on what happened to this script, so I can't really say, why this was canceled or whatnot. I'm guessing though, because this is dated February 2011 when Green Lantern wasn't yet out. And I'm guessing that the poor critical performance, poor fan reception, and mediocre box office of the Green Lantern movie probably killed this project dead and made them reconsider. And made them reconsider, because there wasn't really anything about the Flash really announced for quite a little while until in that weird period after Man of Steel. I think it was like in 2014 when they announced that, there was going to be a DC universe with Man of Steel as the starting point, and then BVS and a bunch of other movies. And the Flash was originally announced in October 2014 for a 2018 release, and well, that hasn't happened. And this went through a lot of development. And before, Ezra Miller was cast for BVS, and so we got that cameo in BVS, a better cameo in Suicide Squad, and we eventually got to see him in Justice League, and I didn't like how they did the character in that at all, with the stupid brunch jokes and the fucking K-pop videos, and the one joke from that character that actually worked was the Pet Cemetery joke, because that was actually kind of funny, but I thought the Flash was just awful in that movie, frankly, and so I just kind of lost interest. But the actual development of the solo Flash movie for this universe, which still hasn't happened yet, and who knows what it's going to look like if it ever does, is that Initially, Warner Brothers, they contracted Phil Lord and Chris Miller, the guys behind the Lego movie and some other animated stuff, to do, and also the Jump Street movies, to write a treatment. And they were also being courted to direct, but they declined because they were busy. And later on, it turned out that what they were busy with was Solo, and we all know how that turned out, to say the least. We'll leave it there. And so eventually in 2016, they signed Seth Grahame-Smith to direct, and it would be his And it would be his directorial debut, which he still hasn't made one yet, actually, I don't think. He's been mainly a producer and a screenwriter in Hollywood. I mean, he's written books too, but he's been mainly in Hollywood, a screenwriter and a producer. And he was supposed to write, and I believe he was writing based on the Lord and Miller treatment. And then he dropped out in April 2016 due to creative differences. But the studio kept his script. And then in the June of that year, they hired, I'm going to fuck this name up, Rick Famuyiwa, who had done a movie called, was it Dope? I think it was Dope. And he got hired to direct The Flash. And he cast Kiersey Clemons as Iris West. And there was talk of Ray Fisher reprising his cyborg role in the movie, but then the director said no, he's not going to. And that was a rumor that came and went for a while, where it's like, Cyborg's going to get a solo movie, but he's also going to be in Flash. We're canceling the Cyborg movie, and he's just going to be in Flash. No, he's not going to be in Flash. It was like back and forth on that for like a year there. And it was the filming was scheduled to start in January 2017, but then on October 31st, of 2016, he left the film over creative differences, and that seems to have just stalled out any sort of actual production on this thing, because that seemed like it was the best point in time to actually get the movie. Like, that was the one point in time where it actually seemed like the movie was getting made. And then everything went into flux after this. And then after Justice League, the entire DCEU went into flux, so there's that. And so then in January 2017, Joby Harold was hired to rewrite the script. It was supposedly going to be a page 1 rewrite. And this is where the rumors of it being based on Flashpoint came in, I believe. And there's a bunch of directors they were considering, including Robert Zemeckis, Matthew Vaughn, and Sam Raimi, as well as Mark Webb. And apparently they were talking to Lord and Miller again at this point. And apparently Deadline reported sometime in 2017 that Gal Gadot was supposed to play Wonder Woman in the movie. I kind of doubt that. And so that went on, and then we got a solid announcement in 2018 where it was announced that John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein, they did Game Night and they helped write Spider-Man Homecoming, they signed on to direct, and they were apparently writing. And they left in July 2019, and apparently it was over clashes with Ezra Miller over what the film was going to be like, and then there was this talk of Ezra Miller writing his own script with Grant Morrison, and I guess that didn't work out because in 2019, some point in 2019, Andy Muschietti was hired to direct, and Christina Hodson was hired to write the new script, so I guess they didn't like the Morrison Ezra Miller version either. And they're currently the creative team that are on it, but we haven't heard jack shit about it since these announcements. And all we know is that it was scheduled for July 1st, 2022, but it got moved up to June 3rd, 2022. We've heard nothing about it since then. I don't think this movie is... If this movie happens, it'll be very, very far from now, and it will probably be without Ezra Miller, least of which because he went out and choked a bitch. But, other than that, I mean, I feel like it's going to take so long that Warner Brothers is just going to stop trying with the guy. So yeah, it's a project that is currently in flux. No one knows what the hell is going on with it seems. And yeah, will it happen? Not soon. I think it'll take a long time for this movie to happen, but that's just me personally. So yeah, that's the Flash live action for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was one which took me a little too long to put together, honestly, but I really hope this was a good episode for you to listen to. And you know what? But before we go, I got one more thing I gotta do. I got a review on Stitcher. And it was 2 months ago, and I missed it because I never look at my Stitcher page. And it's from Martin T1000. Great show for film nerds. This show fills a very specific niche, but anyone who is an avid film nerd should give this a listen. This goes double if you're an aspiring screenwriter. Listening to this show gives you a great feel for the do's and don'ts of screenwriting. I do. I didn't really think of that. I think I'm just a dude talking about stuff, but cool. Whether it's a solo episode or with a host, the show is just plain fun. Well, thank you, Martin. That's a lot of fun. Sorry I didn't get to your review soon enough. I never look at my Stitcher page. But that's it for this episode. Hope you guys enjoy it. And until next time, bye.